Chapter 948 Meaning of Existence from Audrey's point of view. Mr. World's current situation wasn't him suffering from a mental illness, nor was it close to pushing him to the state of losing control. It was because his goal in life and the meaning to his existence had been destroyed. It left him with a psychological barrier that just needed some guidance. Once she helped him set up a short-term goal, allowing him to find meaning in life, the problem would slowly be resolved. In the serene and silent darkness, Audrey heard Gammon Sparrow answer in a deep voice across the wall. No. As expected. Audrey wasn't surprised as she asked. Then did he search for his family's last words? Did he search for their grave? Did he try to figure out the reason for the deep sleep? The spirit body behind the wall seemed to vanish for a few seconds as there wasn't a single sound. After a moment, the hoarse voice continued. No, not yet. Not yet. That means that it's a possibility in the future? Audrey felt relieved as she clearly felt that Gammon Sparrow's emotional state wasn't as heavy and gloomy as before, without any interest in anything. He had a certain level of drive and a tiny sense of urgency. He was just still in a state of confusion. Taking this opportunity, Audrey cast Placate again. The effects were much better than before. At the very least, she believed that Mr. World had used this impetus to escape from the abyss of gloominess and depression, returning to a normal person's disheartened state. Following that, Audrey didn't press on regarding how he could find clues or investigate, because this could bring about some resistance. She nodded in the dark room in a natural manner and said, Yes, there are many things to do, and many things that need amending. Perhaps you will have the chance of meeting someone from the same bloodline? Perhaps a family member of his hasn't died from age, or had ended up living to this day due to some reason. The reason why there's meaning to life is because of its infinite possibilities. In the process of searching, make sure to not miss out on your surroundings. Life isn't just a one-way street. There are many branches and alleys. If only the former exists, how boring would it be? You should know how to approach it, to broaden your horizons, and to discover. Trying hard to recall all the suitable words she read in books, Audrey suddenly thought of something as her voice softened significantly. Also, don't wear that thick mask. The thinner and transparent ones don't matter because everyone wears a mask when interacting with others. No one likes to directly express one's relatively private secrets to others. It's both a way to protect oneself and also a way to respect others. When Mr. World has a certain number of friends, a new meaning in life will naturally be formed. Audrey added inwardly, but she ultimately didn't say it out loud. She believed that it might even backfire. Unsurprisingly, Gammon Sparrow fell silent again, seemingly still in confusion. After a few seconds, a voice that wasn't that hoarse sounded again. Thank you for straightening me out, and for your treatment. No, this is all a result of the strength inside you, Audrey replied seriously. She cast a final placate to confirm that Mr. World's mental state was back to normal and that it wouldn't relapse. She then heard Gammon Sparrow say, Let's end it here for today, okay? Audrey adjusted her tone and briskly replied, Of course. It's not a serious problem. I can do another follow-up whenever you're free next week. Also, if it's possible, make some medicine to stabilize your mental state. Take it for 7 consecutive days. The ingredients are 10 grams of chamomile powder, 5 grams of rosemary powder, 10 milliliters of lemon balm extract. During this period, don't reduce your consumption of desserts, and try to relax yourself in an appropriate manner. In the dark and silent room, she propped herself against the wall with her hands and slowly stood up. At this moment, Gammon Sparrow's voice passed through the wall. What's the consultation fee? Audrey held one hand to the wall and turned her head in thought. Wait till I get the potion formula for sequence 5 of the spectator pathway. I might need you to help me find the ingredients. If the psychology alchemist provides me with the ingredients, She curled the ends of her lips and said, When you return from the southern continent to Backland, remember to bring me some of the local produce as a gift. A super luxurious and light transportation coffin that's carried by 8 people? On the other side of the wall, Klein had the inexplicable urge to lampoon. He then stood up while clinging to the wall and sent Miss Justice back to the real world. With a wave of his hand, the room vanished. He returned to the seat of honor at the long bronze table and sat at the seat belonging to the fool. In front of him, there were the Black Emperor, Tyrant, and Red Priest cards of blasphemy on the right. On the left, there was the Creeping Hunger, which Leonard Mitchell had sent back via Miss Messenger Rionette Tynker. I owe Miss Messenger 10,000 gold coins again. Klein retracted his gaze and raised his right hand to rub his temples. To prevent Ince Zangwill from escaping through the spirit world, He had already communicated with Rionette Tinker before he made plans for the murder. She was in charge of chasing away all the spirit world creatures around Revival Square, in exchange for that very same 10,000 gold coins. The only thing that caught him by surprise was that 0-08 was more terrifying than he imagined. With Ince Zangwill suffering from Deity's curse, and with King of Angels Adam having drained it, its first attempt was able to attract an unknown creature which could pass through Rionette Tinker's seal. If not for Daily Simone's forceful spirit channeling and signing a pact, Ince Zangwill might very well have escaped. Of course, while under Deity's curse, even if Ince Zangwill were to successfully escape, there was a high chance of him encountering other misfortunes, such as being thrown by the unknown creature to somewhere more dangerous or having it directly cause him harm. However, that wasn't within Klein's control. At the thought that he was 10,000 gold coins in debt again, Klein felt a headache, but his mental state was a lot better. After seeing the cocoon above the gray cloud, and the door of light beyond the staircase of light, he had suffered a shock that was as though a river had broken through its banks. He felt that all his expectations had been shattered. His mature worldview, outlook on life, and values had crumbled as a result, causing his entire being to fall into a turbid state, as though he were a walking zombie. Thankfully, he still had the innate desire to live and had sought out his private psychiatrist, Miss Justice Audrey, in time for treatment. Phew. Klein exhaled and forced himself to turn his thoughts towards the cocoons. And from the scene he saw, his first reaction was, an extremely high-level existence or sealed artifact had used different means to grab a large group of people from Earth at the same moment in time. Here, there were people who used the luck enhancement ritual, others bought strange silver plates, or had their phones hit by some strange virus. Then, these transmigrators had their souls sealed inside the cocoon and were left hanging above the door of light, awaiting a particular opportunity before being sent to the real world. Based on Klein's observation, the door of light didn't have any intelligence. It was operating based on pure instinct. This also meant that as long as the conditions were met, it would catalyze a cocoon and deliver the soul inside to a specific target's body. Based on the current circumstances, Klein guessed that there were probably two conditions that needed to be met. First, there mustn't be any other transmigrators prior, or the transmigrator had already been deemed to have failed or died. Second, the calling out of a certain object, item, or ritual. For instance, Klein Moretti had followed the Antigonus family's notebook to perform that dark divination. As for the rest, it's impossible to know. Unless I can find the corresponding content in Emperor Roselle's diary. Putting together everything that I know, my current theory should be very close to the truth. This will make it easy to explain why, despite being from the same era as the Emperor on Earth with less than a year in between us, our entry into the real world was separated by slightly more than 200 years. It's because we transmigrated at the same time, but we were released in different eras. Before entering the real world, who knows how long we've been asleep for? A brother from next door. Klein leaned back into his chair as his eyes shimmered before turning gloomy again. This was a hypothesis he came up with based on the conditions of the Door of Light, his situation, and the Emperor's diary. Of course, this didn't mean that there weren't other possibilities. At present, Klein was just unable to find evidence to support them. For example, a cocoon might represent the life of a transmigrator, but this was in contradiction with Klein's own recovery or the lack of change in his spirit body. And if his hypothesis wasn't too different from the truth, it meant that he had left Earth, transmigrating over for at least 200 years or even thousands of years. Even if he found the way and method to go back to Earth, he was unable to return to the place he called home. Compared to the gap in distance, the barrier of time left him in greater despair. This was the reason why it caused Klein's mental state to instantly collapse. Returning home was always his ultimate goal. Miss Justice is right. There are still many questions to resolve and to probe. What's the meaning behind hanging so many transmigrators behind the Door of Light? What goal does it have? Who set up everything back then? How many people were pulled in here? Where has the other person gone to? The celestial worthy of heaven and earth? Klein tried hard to engross himself in thinking, so as to find a new goal for the future. Unfortunately, he was only able to approach the Door of Light and not touch it. He was unable to touch it, grasp it, or even carefully inspect it. He had no means to do any studies to receive any direct information. I should consider finding clues from the real world. Also, since reaching Sequence 4 allows me to reach that gray cloud and see the Door of Light, will there be another qualitative change at Sequence 2? Will I be able to gain control over the Door of Light when that happens, allowing me to figure out the truth? Heh, I was affected by the seven lights, the goddess, and a Rhodes's attitude. I almost imagine myself to be the real owner of the gray fog, and believe that I'm some great master above the spirit world. Now, from the looks of it, I'm just a test subject that was randomly thrown down. Once I fail, the next transmigrator will appear. Klein thought as he tapped the edge of the long bronze table. He was rather curious of another point. 3 broken cocoons, with one representing himself, and another representing the emperor. So who was the third one? Chapter 949 Direction of Investigations. Klein's first target of suspicion was undoubtedly Elf King Siniathrim. This ancient god had created chopsticks, made blood cakes, enjoyed eating animal innards, and was good at using spices for cooking. His descendants had facial features, hair color, and eyes that resembled Asians on Earth. Not only did Klein suspect that he was a transmigrator, even Emperor Roselle shared his feelings. Of course, after a deeper level of investigations, Roselle had ruled out that hypothesis from their language, symbols, traditional proverbs, and other facets. Klein believed that using chopsticks as cutlery, the preference for eating innards, and using spices wasn't an exclusive trait. To a species that enjoyed nature, it was possible for these to gradually appear in their daily life. As for why elves who wielded the sailor pathway were close to nature, Klein didn't know why. It was just something as described by the murals and texts they left behind. I for one felt that the Elf King is unlikely to be a transmigrator, but after seeing the 3 shattered cocoons, I can't be too sure. Perhaps he might be a fellow countryman. I can't rule out the possibility that this ancient god isn't a transmigrator but that one of the high-ranking elves around him is one. This can also allow the tradition to pass down in the name of the Elf King. Klein tapped his fingers as he thought silently. Almost at the same time, he had 2 directions for his investigation. Roselle's travels had elvish songster, Ciatas, who served Siniathrim's queen of Calamity Kohinum. As long as I enter her sea of collective subconscious, I should be able to see or make contact with the elves and find memory fragments regarding the ancient god. I can also use hypnosis, directly allowing her subconscious to speak. But the problem is that I'm not good at such matters. The last time I attempted to delve into Roselle's subconscious, I felt quick-tempered and could hardly calm down. Although I'm already a demigod, it also becomes more pressing that I resist the inclination towards madness and losing control. And I won't be able to regulate my mental state for quite some time. Forcefully spirit channeling isn't suitable for such a situation and for such a target. Klein frowned slightly. He felt that he might need a mystical item that was of a relatively high-level sequence in the spectator pathway, or an assistant that was at least a hypnotist. He began seriously considering the possibility of getting Miss Justice's help. There's no problem doing it. It's not impossible to leave by entering as a spirit body above the gray fog. I don't have to worry that Miss Justice will pry into the secret of a transmigrator. As long as Ciatas doesn't have any knowledge of this, her subconscious and collective subconscious wouldn't point towards such a conclusion. And I can find the desired clues in details so they don't pay any notice. The biggest problem is that Miss Justice has no adventuring experience and she lacks it. Entering the sea of subconscious of an ancient figure is very dangerous to her. There might be the remnants of an ancient god in there at any time. Once I don't have the help of a psychiatrist, I will also end up the same. Even if I'm getting Miss Justice as support, I'll have to wait until she reaches sequence 5 so that she can use her level to make up for her lack of experience. When that happens, we can first attempt to hypnotize Ciatas and see what we can learn from her mouth. If there's nothing of value, we can consider entering her dream to delve deeper into her consciousness and step into that sea. Yes, the dream charms I create now aren't potent enough. I might not be able to maintain such a long exploration. Sigh, the goddess won't directly respond to such trivial matters. It's a fixed feedback based on a fixed ritual. The corresponding beyonder characteristics have been returned to the church. Don't tell me that I need to bring Leonard with me? I wonder if pulling someone at the spirit body level can avoid the notice of the grandpa inside him. I'll do some research over the next few days. Klein reined in his thoughts and considered his second target of suspicion. This person didn't seem too special in the past, nor did Klein believe that he was a transmigrator. But now that his mind calmed down, he began processing his thoughts and analyzing. Klein realized that many points that he viewed as common sense weren't that simple on careful thought. They contained an unspeakable sense of horror. He suspected the ancient sun god, the City of Silver's creator. The 7 churches separate Bibles have similarities to Earth's Western religions. It is similarly the case for their masses. Based on Little Sun's description, from what Emperor Roselle saw from Adam's chapel, and the content of the murals in the Forsaken Land of the Gods, it's clear that the ancient sun god's main symbol is the cross. He gave his children the names Adam and Ammon. The angels beneath him all have wings of light. I've not seen that in the other pathways to date. It's unknown how he rose up. He'd suddenly appeared late in the second epoch, killed several ancient gods, and took their various authorities. I never thought much about these details in the past. It's quite scary now that I think deeply of it. Klein drew a gasp as he began feeling more convinced that it was the ancient sun god instead of Elf King Sennayathrim. His experiences were just too legendary, more of a protagonist of an era than Emperor Roselle. Of course, his outcome was rather tragic, becoming a feast for his kings of angels. Emperor Roselle was also tragic but in no way as terrible. Doesn't this imply Ammon's and Adam's attitude in a certain sense? They believe that the gray fog is related to their father, but due to their different pathways, they made different choices? There's a certain chance that Adam can't see the gray fog. He isn't a high-sequence beyonder of the Fate, Marauder, Seer, and Apprentice pathways. Klein nodded slightly. Based on these clues, he also had a direction of investigation that didn't require him to make contact with major figures at the angel level. In Groselle's travels lived a Cetic snowman who survived the third epoch and had served the ancient sun god. The problem circles back to itself. There's nothing to doubt about the rest for the time being. Klein slowly exhaled, reached out his right hand, and picked up the newly obtained card of blasphemy. Red Priest card. Infusing his spirituality into it, the card produced a blood-red light, forming a palm-sized illusory book. The pages of the book flipped, presenting portraits of a lifelike Roselle Gustave. He was either wearing a hunter's attire, raising his middle finger, walking through a burning building, or standing behind a trap. He had all sorts of attires and was doing all kinds of things. Sequence 9. Hunter. Sequence 8. Provoker. Sequence 7. Pyromaniac. Sequence 6. Conspirer. Sequence 5. Reaper. Sequence 4. Iron-blooded knight. Sequence 3. War bishop. Sequence 2. Weather warlock. Sequence 1. Conqueror. Sequence 0. Red priest. Klein's gaze swept past the different portraits on the tarot card and imprinted the content into his mind. He wasn't surprised at this pathway sequence O's ritual to become a god. This was because Hermes had once told Roselle that the red in Red Priest meant the red of war. Therefore, when he saw G stirring up a war that sweeps an entire continent and gain victory, he wasn't stirred at all. After flipping the Red Priest card, he began thinking about problems and felt his mental state improve. He rubbed his temples, finally feeling exhausted. I should set a short-term goal and investigate the person behind the Great Smog of Backlund. This is something that I've yet to complete. Yes, I should continue the arms deal according to my original plans, and return to Backlund after receiving the money. Now there are 2 clues. First, the captain of the Royal Guards, Viscount Stratford, and the other is MI9's deputy director, Brigadier General Conas Kilgore. Klein tried to pull himself up and decided to occupy himself with something. Before leaving the grey fog, he threw the mental medicine recipe that Miss Justice had given him to the Crimson Star representing the moon Emlyn. He requested this vampire, who was good at making it, to make a week's worth at £1 a bottle. Backlund. Within the Odora family's villa. Emlyn White, who was waiting in the activity room, curled his lips and thought to himself, a transaction that's just £7. I really don't want to do it. The world can concoct it himself if he's a little careful. He hadn't objected to the world's request, because after spending £5,000 to buy the Sequence 5 Vampire Beyonder characteristic, he only had £730 left. At this moment, Cosme walked over, looking like a middle-aged gentleman. After exchanging a bow, the Sanguine Baron asked, Emlyn, why are you suddenly here? Emlyn immediately felt a little guilty before recalling his previous experiences of conversing with the Hanged Man and the world. He tipped his chin slightly and answered in a seemingly casual manner, I've received a Sequence 5 Scarlet Scholar Beyonder characteristic. I wonder when we can begin the ritual to make me a Viscount. Cosme was taken aback as he asked in surprise, You obtained a Scarlet Scholar Beyonder characteristic? Emlyn glanced at him and nodded with a faint smile. That's right. He didn't explain how he had obtained the Beyonder characteristic. As though Cosme wasn't worthy of knowing, Cosme turned agape as he fell silent. After a few seconds he said, "Wait till the next full moon." He paused and said, "I happen to have something for you. My grandfather wishes to inform you that an important figure will be coming to Backland." "He wishes to meet you." Emlyn's pupils dilated instantly. The ancient ones of the Sanguine that lived since the second epoch to this day, together with the Grade O sealed artifacts, all of those important existences at the angel level didn't exceed 5 in number. Chapter 950 Keeping Secrets. Emlyn fell silent for 2 seconds as he lowered his chin and asked, "Who is it?" To him, angels were naturally worthy of respect, but those who could truly make him bow his head were the important figures addressed as he by every Sanguine. They had witnessed and experienced the Sanguine's long history, the source of his pride. "I'm not sure. But in short, I'll notify you when the time comes." Cosmiodora shook his head. "The person is coming because of the ancestor's revelation? There are subsequent instructions? Why doesn't the ancestor directly give me a revelation? This will be better concealed. I'm her chosen one. This is to avoid agitating Mr. Fool?" Questions flashed past Emlyn's mind as he answered them himself. He didn't speak further as he wore his top hat and left Odora's villa. When he arrived at the door, he looked at the thin clouds that could hardly block out the sun. Emlyn curled his lips in disdain, raised his hand to press down on his hat, and ran for a rental carriage at the end of the street as he inwardly mumbled, "Such weather really isn't suitable for heading out. The medicine that the world wants isn't rare. It can be concocted in 15 minutes. The ingredients I ordered previously should be in by today. I can carry out the transaction with Miss Magician that I've delayed for days. Backland. Cherwood Borough." Furs placed glass bottles on an altar and looked at the light blue and golden liquids, feeling the exhilaration from shopping. More enticing than a cocktail. "I wonder what it tastes like. Putting some ice in might make it taste better. Seriously, what am I thinking? These are all medicine." Furs sputtered at herself and hurriedly cleaned up the room. Upon receiving the medicine required for medical treatment, she finished her preparations for heading to the abandoned castle in Dallaire Forest. She was just waiting for Zio to return. After tidying up certain matters, Furs slumped onto the sofa and casually picked up a few newspaper copies and began planning her itinerary for the day. Set off at dusk. Dinner will probably be when we arrive at the town bordering the forest. Amidst her silent mumbling, Furs flipped to the copy of News at Sea. Suddenly, her gaze froze as a familiar name was reflected in her eyes. Gehrman Sparrow. This adventurer had appeared at sea again, boarding the Black Tulip with a middle-aged name known as Death Consul. He killed Admiral Hell Ludwell, changing the lineup of the 7 pirate admirals again. Illil Furs subconsciously patted her chest, unsure what she was happy about. At that instant, she had a baffling feeling that Gehrman Sparrow's experiences were sufficiently legendary, something that could definitely be written into a novel. Unfortunately, he's not someone who's easy to get along with. Otherwise, I can totally be a part-time biographer to write a book for him. Haha, if I were to write the book titled Gehrman Sparrow, I'll definitely be targeted by the official Beyonders. Furs thought in amusement before hearing the lock turn. She looked up and saw Zio pushing open the door and entering the living room. "You're early?" Furs asked in surprise. Zio ruffled the right side of her blonde hair and said, "I met with MI9 again and received a mission." "What is it?" Furs sat up, asking out of curiosity. Zio casually threw herself onto the single-seater. "Investigate the background of the crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow. Based on the information provided by MI9, he's a terrifying Beyonder, and the name he uses is fake. Even his identification documents are fake. He probably came from Backland. They suspect that Gehrman Sparrow has another identity and partners here." Upon hearing the word partners, Furs couldn't help but twitch the corners of her mouth. She had the urge to tell Zio that MI9's guess was right. Gehrman Sparrow's partner was sitting directly opposite her. She coughed slightly and acted calm while she asked, "Why are you investigating Gehrman Sparrow's background? What did he do this time?" Zio glanced at the stack of newspapers beside Furs. "Haven't you read today's News at Sea? Gehrman Sparrow killed Admiral Hell Ludwell and is now known as the strongest adventurer of the 5 seas. By the way, MI9 also told me that Gehrman Sparrow might very well believe in the secret existence known as the Fool. This is news that came from many different sources, including the Aurora Order and the Rose School of Thought. I can testify to that. They are right." Furs forced a smile and said, Sounds rather dangerous. Yeah. Zio nodded. I only plan on gathering the intel and not delving too deep into it. Furs didn't continue on this topic as she said, I've already prepared the medicine. Shall we head to Delaire Forest today? Zio had already become a Sequence 7 interrogator a few days ago, and she had mastered a rather useful power, psychic piercing. All right. Zio stood up, showcasing how she was a woman of action. Let's set off now. Let's wait a little longer. I was thinking dusk, Furs replied, feeling a little resistant. She often wished to procrastinate until the last moment. Before long, she was pulled out of their rented apartment by Zio while bringing all kinds of items along. They got a rental carriage and headed for the metro. Amidst the sonorous whistle of the steam engine, the massive steam locomotive hauled its meandering body and entered the platform. Under the illumination of the wall lamps on both sides, it stopped. Furs and Zio stood outside a carriage and waited patiently for the passengers to alight. Suddenly, they saw two red gloves. The owner of the red gloves was a man in his 30s. He wore a white shirt with a black trench coat. His collar was raised up high, covering his chin and mouth. He had a pair of dark green eyes with golden brown sideburns. He held a silver chest that was big enough to put a tiny violin in it. Furs and Zio exchanged looks as they lowered their gaze, staring at their toes. As a high-ranking deacon of the Church of Evernights Nighthawks, one of the 22 members of power in the church, and one of the 3 bigwigs of the Red Gloves, Christet Casimir wasn't someone who cared about parading himself around. He enjoyed traveling alone, taking the transportation that commoners took, making him appear like an ordinary clergyman. After transferring to another line, he eventually arrived in Northborough. He then took a rental carriage and headed straight for St. Samuel Cathedral, where he met Backland Diocese's Archbishop, St. Anthony Stevenson. After greeting each other and praising the goddess, Casimir found a seat and said, I'll be troubling you to provide me with some help for the next couple weeks. The clean-shaved Archbishop, Anthony, in his black robe with red accents, sat down as well. He deliberated before asking, Is it something to do with Ensanguil? Yes. Casimir nodded slightly. The Holy See wishes that I inform you that another servant of the goddess, the matron of the Evernight Cloister, Mam Ariana, will be in Backland not long from now. This ascetic was ranked first among all the 13 archbishops. Without waiting for St. Anthony's inquiry, he explained in detail, Mam Ilya learned plenty of important information from Ensanguil's remnant spirit, including his mental problems that 0-08 used to escape, as well as the details of his cooperation with the royal family and the Demonist sect. After machinating the Great Smog of Backland, Ensanguil was betrayed by 0-08 and had ended up being possessed by the Red Angel evil spirit. He headed for the southern continent alone in an attempt to set up a trap to hunt Mam Ilya. An important point to take note of is that in Ensanguil's memories, there is a very important underground ruin. It's in the northwestern outskirts of Backland, an area just before the Tussock River flows in. My mission is to find that ruin. St. Anthony finished listening in silence before asking in thought, Ensanguil doesn't know of the exact location? He has never been there before? Casimir shook his head. He had entered, but he was led in there and didn't grasp the required key information. St. Anthony tersely acknowledged before asking, Have you figured out which batch of people from the royal family that Ensanguil was working with? No. Christet Casimir paused and continued, based on normal logic, regardless of whether the partners don disguises, if they meet, there should be the corresponding memory fragments, but inside Ensanguil's spirit body, there were no traces of that. It was as though it never existed. Perhaps it's an influence of a deed. The source of the deed's power that even a Sequence 4 demigod can't resist is something worth paying attention to. St. Anthony nodded very slightly. He thought and said, The telegram didn't include much. I do not know the exact sequence of events. Who exactly killed Ensanguil? Christet Casimir exhaled slowly and said, A name you might never believe, Klein Moretti. The Nighthawk who died in the line of duty during the Tingen incident? Anthony's wrinkles deepened. Yes, that's what Ilya sent back. No one knows how Klein Moretti, who was only a Sequence 8, had resurrected, or how he could kill Ensanguil, a demigod wielding 0-08. Upon saying this, Casimir's expression turned somewhat odd. The Holy See requests us to strictly keep this intel confidential. We are not to divulge this to anyone who isn't an archbishop or high-ranking deacon. Furthermore, we are not to pursue Klein Moretti, pretending as though he's still in his grave. Saint Anthony fell silent for a few seconds as though he recalled something trivial. He nodded and said, "Perhaps, he's a blessed of the goddess." Casimir suddenly looked up at Saint Anthony as though he was a lunatic. His lips quivered, but he ultimately didn't say a word. Anthony didn't continue the topic as he looked at the door and said sternly, "Your mission might need plenty of investigations. This requires enough manpower." Soest's team has completed their mission in the southern continent. I'll get them to return quickly and follow your instructions. All right. Crestet Casimir didn't put up any objections. Rest for the remainder of the day before returning to Backlund? Leonard looked up at team captain, Soest. Soest looked pitifully at Leonard, who had been silent for quite some time, and nodded. That's right. After watching this spirit warlock leave his room, Leonard sighed and leaned against the wall. At this moment, dark red light surged out from before his eyes, enveloping him completely without any prior warning. Chapter 951. Drawing a card. By the time Leonard reacted, he saw numerous towering stone pillars, as well as a towering palace that looked like a giant's residence above the endless grayish-white fog that was being propped up by these stone pillars. His green eyes wore a blank look. After a second, Leonard found himself sitting on a high-backed chair beside a long mottled bronze table at some point in time. Beside him and opposite him were high-backed chairs that exuded solemnity. And at the end of the long mottled table, where the seat of honor was, a figure was shrouded in thick gray fog. The figure was leaning into his seat leisurely, as though he was overlooking everything. When this figure appeared in Leonard's eyes, he felt as though he was on a liner, seeing a bottomless abyss whose boundaries were nowhere to be seen. It also felt like he had left the city and was on the outskirts, looking up to see lofty mountains that tore through the clouds. Instantly, many thoughts flashed through Leonard's mind. He had a rough guess as to what he was experiencing. As a beyonder of the church, a believer who knew that deities truly exist, he wasn't able to resist his feelings. He subconsciously wished to leave his seat and prostrate before the existence before him. The might of a deity was boundless. Just as Leonard stood up, he was pressed down by an invisible force. A slow and calm voice resonated in his ears. "There's no need for such trouble. You can call me Mr. Fool." The Fool. Indeed. Leonard's fear of the unknown had settled immediately. Although he was still worried about what would happen next, he wasn't that perturbed any longer. He didn't sit uneasily with a dry mouth and parched lips. He got up halfway, pressed his hand to his chest, and bowed. "Honorable Mr. Fool, why did you summon me here?" As an experienced nighthawk and a red glove who had participated in major cases, Leonard knew how dangerous it was to establish a connection with a secret existence. He knew that he had slid down the edge of the abyss and had no chance of redemption. At that moment when he decided to chant the Fool's honorific name, he was able to foresee his tragic end. But for revenge, he had made the choice regardless. However, everyone had the instinct to survive. Recalling how Klein Moretti, who believed in the Fool, was still alive and had even become a demigod, Leonard couldn't help but hold out some hope and expectations. At this moment, he heard the fog-enshrouded Fool chuckle. "Since you prayed to me for help, then based on the principle of equivalent exchange, you definitely need to pay the price." Leonard's body trembled as he bowed his head lower. "What is it you wish?" After a brief pause, the Fool's voice sounded again. "There's no rush. Perhaps there will be something that requires you to provide help to certain people. Have a seat." Leonard slowly calmed himself down and sat a day. He looked around and asked, Klein Moretti has been here like me?" The Fool said with a calm tone. "In a different manner." Different manner. Indeed, Klein didn't enter because he chanted the honorific name. He had been introduced by that death consul named Azek Eggers before becoming one of Mr. Fool's faithful. Leonard couldn't help but survey the area, and he discovered that there were a total of 22 high-backed chairs around the long mottled table. It corresponds to the 22 Beyonder pathways. There are also 22 tarot cards. The Fool. Just as Leonard came up with a theory, he heard Mr. Fool chuckle. "Other than you, there are other living beings that have been pulled in here for various reasons. They earnestly wished for me to convene a gathering to carry out the exchange of information and the transaction of materials and formulas. They also help each other. This allows them to rapidly advance, eventually becoming high-sequence Beyonders. This is a little different from the secret organization represented by tarot cards I had imagined. It's rather loosely organized. What motives does Mr. Fool have to agree to such a request?" After coming to the ancient palace above the gray fog, Leonard felt high-strung, causing his thought processes to be a lot more agile than usual. He came up with all kinds of questions. After successfully achieving revenge, he had been feeling low-spirited and empty for a moment, as though he had lost his goal in life. However, he quickly pulled himself together. This was because Daly's death told him that he wasn't strong enough. To reduce the number of casualties of his companions in future missions and so as to not lack the ability to save them, he needed to reach Sequence 4 at the very least. He needed to become a demigod. Therefore, the fool's words had stirred his heart. He felt that it was an opportunity. Meanwhile, he also believed that by joining the gathering, he could deeply understand the situation of the secret organization. It helped in maximally averting the danger that resulted from establishing contact with the fool. After some deliberation, Leonard asked, "Klein Moretti is also a regular member of this gathering? Does he have a seat here?" The fool replied without much concern, "Yes." Leonard fell silent for a second as he asked, "Honorable Mr. Fool, can I join this regular gathering?" Shrouded in the gray fog, the fool said with a smile, "Sure. But when you return, remember to mention this to Palez Zoroast about it. Do not attempt to hide it from him." Old man really is an angel. It's no wonder the luck siphon charm is so magical. Although Leonard had already expected this, he still couldn't help but be alarmed after receiving confirmation from Mr. Fool. He hesitated for a moment and said, "Why must I tell Palez Zoroast?" Although he had a good relationship with Palez Zoroast and had established a certain level of trust, he still felt wary. The reason why he had made the request to join Mr. Fool's secret gathering was to balance the latent danger of the ancient parasite. He then heard Mr. Fool reply with a smile, "Many a time, striking fear is a lot more useful than conflict." Striking fear is a lot more useful than conflict. That's right, forcefully creating a balance might agitate old man regardless. The final battlefield will be in my body, and it would be extremely disadvantageous to me. By striking fear into him, I can get him to recognize the situation. Even if he has ill intent, he will think of another solution and take another path. Leonard bowed his head in enlightenment. "Honorable Mr. Fool, I have no more questions." At the end of the long bronze table, the fool conjured a deck of tarot cards and lifted up his hand and pointed at them. They have each selected a tarot card to represent their code name. You can also choose one. The deck has the cards of their respective owners taken away. They do use tarot cards as their code names. Leonard exhaled and couldn't help but ask again, "Which card is Klein Moretti?" "The world," the fool said casually. "It's him and also not him." "What does that mean?" Leonard didn't dare to ask further. He extended his right hand and pulled out a card from the deck of tarot cards. Flipping it over, he saw a goddess pouring holy water, with stars littering the background. The star card. This didn't match Leonard's taste, but since he had already completed the ritual under Mr. Fool's watch, he could only accept it. Return. The gathering happens every Monday at 3 in the afternoon, Backlund time. Shrouded in the gray fog, the fool raised his hand and made Leonard, who was rushing to bow, vanish from the ancient palace. The fool Klein chuckled as he flipped all the tarot cards. All of them had the same picture with the same sky-filled stars. All of them were the star cards. After laughing for a while, Klein cast his gaze to the crimson star that represented Leonard. While attempting to pull the poet above the gray fog, he had made some careful observation and had discovered that there was a blob of light hiding in Leonard Mitchell's body. It seemed to be made of countless ringed worms, hidden deep inside his soul body. This made Klein confirm that Palez Zoroast had only parasitized Leonard at a preliminary stage. He didn't control Leonard's body of heart and mind, astral projection, ether body, and physical body. And after advancing to become a demigod, Klein had gained a deeper control over the mysterious space above the gray fog, allowing him to pull in anyone he wanted, without targeting the soul. He could make a selection. Therefore, Klein decided to not touch Leonard's soul body, and only pulled his astral projection above the gray fog. This avoided agitating Palez Zoroast or end up bringing him into the mysterious space. Of course, it was almost certain that the Sequence 1 angel of the Marauder pathway would notice it, and the ability to enter the dreams of others stemmed from the astral projection of Beyonders of the Evernight pathway, so it didn't affect Leonard's ability to do what he was good at in this mysterious space. Let's hope that he can escape from Palez Zoroast's parasitizing bit by bit. Klein suddenly sighed. The reason why he made Leonard join the Tarot Club was because he wished to help this former teammate grow stronger, allowing him to escape the claws of Palez Zoroast. If that marauder pathway angel didn't have any ill intent, he could get Leonard to help him hide from Amon and aid his recovery. This would speed up his switching of parasitic targets. Retracting in his gaze, Klein thought for a moment. He threw the Hunter Pathways Sequence 6 Conspirer Potion formula to the point of light representing Danitz. He then instructed him to leave the southern continent and return to the Golden Dream. Black Hunting Spider's Composite Eye. Sphinx's Brain. Danitz recalled the content he had just seen in a daze as he stood up in delight. He planned to immediately bid farewell to Anderson and leave the dangerous southern continent. After coming to the door of the Fog Sea's strongest hunter, he knocked on the wooden door, only to see it open. Anderson hadn't locked the door. Danitz was puzzled as he cast his gaze inside and saw Anderson holding a knife and sliding it against his abdomen. Chapter 952. What a small world. Danitz jumped in fright as he blurted out, "Sorry, I didn't see anything." Before he could finish his sentence, he had already pulled the door handle towards him. Bang! The door closed, emitting a sound that echoed through the corridor. At this point, Danitz finally came to a realization. What was I doing just now? What is Anderson doing? He instinctively removed the black boxing glove and thought bitterly with a frown. Finally, he decided to return to his room, pack his luggage, and leave. As for what Anderson was trying to do, he felt that something was amiss despite his curiosity. He had no plans on getting himself involved in it, lest he fell into a trap. Captain said that I should maintain fear and respect towards the unknown. So, I should distance myself from this. Just as Danitz turned around, he suddenly heard the door unlock before being opened. Anderson, whose buttons on the lower part of his shirt weren't buttoned up, walked out with a dull pitch-black knife. He looked at Danitz with a mixed expression. "Aren't you going to try to stop me?" Danitz acutely noticed the chance to mock him as he sniggered. "That's your freedom. If you didn't leave a will, I'll be rich." Anderson rubbed his cheeks. "Aren't you curious about what I encountered?" Danitz glanced at him suspiciously. "I keep feeling as though you're up to something." Anderson roared with laughter. "Well, I had been captured some time ago and was soaked in strange blood with all kinds of ingredients. I was corroded by it for an extended period of time until a strange chrysalis was formed inside my body. This was to create the effect of having a certain level of attraction towards high-sequence beyonders of the Hunter pathway." As he spoke, he pointed at his abdomen. Danitz was taken aback. "I've never really heard of something like that. If you were another sex, I might have imagined that you're pregnant." He paused for a moment before asking, "That strange fellow in Revival Square was attracted by the baby, no, chrysalis in your stomach?" Anderson nodded as Danitz gestured with his hands. "You were trying to cut open your abdomen to extract the chrysalis?" Anderson replied honestly, "Yes, I'm worried about how it would affect me, or if it will continue attracting demigods. I have to make every second count to remove this latent problem." Danitz thought before asking in puzzlement, "Then why aren't you making the attempt? You forgot to set up a will, and you want me to be your witness?" Anderson's facial muscles twitched as he chuckled. "Not bad. Your provoker potion should almost be digested." He then sighed. "After some careful analysis, I believe there's no direct way to extract it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have soaked me in blood and allow the ingredients to seep into me. They could have just opened up my stomach and placed the chrysalis inside before sewing me up." Without waiting for Danitz's reply, he said in thought, "Don't you have the method to contact Gehrman Sparrow? He's been through so much and knows so much, so I would like to consult him on how to resolve this problem." In recent months, Danitz was extremely afraid of people raising the matter about him knowing Gehrman Sparrow, so he subconsciously retorted, "No. I haven't seen him since I left the Golden Dream." Anderson curled the corner of his lips and said, "When you were writing to Gehrman Sparrow, I was beside him and have met his messenger." Danitz's expression immediately froze. He forced a smile after a few seconds. "Then why don't you directly summon his messenger?" Anderson raised his hand again and touched his throat, chuckling. "I don't know the ritual for summoning his messenger." Danitz still suspected that Anderson was up to something, and was unwilling to confirm that he had been repeatedly communicating with Gehrman Sparrow. He then suggested, "Actually, you can always seek the help of our captain on such matters. She's very knowledgeable and good at research. She knows many secret techniques and can also seek the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom for help. She should be able to give you the solution for resolving the matter of the chrysalis in your stomach." "Haha, if you're embarrassed, I can talk to her for you." Just as he said that, he saw Anderson's face beam. He quickly replied with a rushed tone, "All right, let's do that. I've already packed my luggage. When shall we set off?" Danitz fell into a daze for a few seconds, feeling that he had been tricked by Anderson. He returned to the room, drank his remaining beer, and threw all the miscellaneous items into his luggage bag, leaving behind a dried leaf with golden patterns. This was the token Danitz previously used to establish contact with the Northern States' dominant leader, General May Sanchez. Following German Sparrow's instructions, he left the leaf inside and allowed the person in charge to follow up. In the room that Danitz checked out of, a candle was suddenly lit as a 2-meter-tall scarlet flame burgeoned. Amidst the flames, a figure walked out. He was wearing a silk top hat, black formal suit, and had white sideburns. He looked outstanding with his deep blue eyes and mature demeanor. He was none other than Klein as Dwayne Dantes. After picking up the leaf with golden patterns, Klein left the hotel, circling around the sealed-off Revival Square, and came to Kukua's core region, White Feather Square. May Sanchez's residence was there, located beside a death cathedral that descended downwards. As a standard Loanese gentleman, Dantes looked out of place when walking through the city. Here, the foreigners were a minority, with most foreigners seen around the few major embassies located around Rejoice Square. The other places were filled with mostly locals from Balam. Their skin was slightly brown, and they had curly black hair. Their facial features were soft, and in the eyes of most people from the northern continent, people of the same sex all looked the same, aside from the differences in height and weight. These locals, be it male or female, enjoyed rolling dried tobacco leaves into Balam cigarettes. Along the way, Klein would see residents spewing out smoke alongside the road from time to time. In addition, many of them hung a fruit known as dalawa by their waists. This fruit was the size of 2 fists, with thick skin. After digging open a tiny hole and eating the flesh inside, one could use it to store water, alcohol, and other beverages. Based on Klein's observations, they mostly drank an orange-yellow guater. It was sour with a hint of sweetness, good at quenching thirst and relieving heat. It was also great at keeping people awake. "I didn't have a chance to try it before," Klein mumbled as he found the guard manning the general's residence and sought to meet a man named Haggis. Due to his appearance as a Loanese person and a gentleman, the guard didn't deny his request or make it difficult for him. He got a person to head in to get a man in his 30s. The man's facial features and skin were that of a standard Balam native. However, his curly black hair had been pulled straight and neatly combed back as though he was trying to mimic members of high society in the various countries of the northern continent. He wore a white shirt and a black vest, matched with a very formal bow tie. Upon seeing Dwayne Dantes, he said in standard Loanese, "Good afternoon, I'm Haggis. Nice to meet you." His accent was a little odd, different from any borough in Lone. Klein had lived in high society for quite a period of time, so he wasn't too surprised. He said with a smile, "Good afternoon, I'm Dwayne Dantes. I never expected to meet a gentleman who's so good at using the accent of Loanese nobles." Haggis couldn't help but smile. Many children of noble birth from Lone have come to East and West Balam to seek out opportunities. I was fortunate to learn from them. "Oh, I might know some of them." Klein wasn't in a rush to talk business as he began making small talk with Haggis like a gentleman. Haggis smiled. "My friend includes Colonel Alfred Hall, the second son of an earl." "Huh." Klein let out a soft chuckle. "I once met Earl Hall at a charity party. He's a true noble. What a small world." Haggis nodded in agreement. Perhaps this is an arrangement of fate. Unfortunately, Alfred was transferred to East Balam last year. He didn't continue as he immediately invited Dwayne Dantes into the general's residence. When passing through the side door, Klein suddenly looked up, glancing at the embedded stained glass above. The glass shimmered like a rainbow under the illumination of sunlight, as though gazes were sweeping past. Chapter 953 Prophecy. Klein retracted his gaze in a natural manner, held his gold inlaid cane, and followed closely behind Haggis before entering the general's residence. The architecture style was completely unlike those found in the southern continent. It didn't make any use of light manipulation to make the rooms appear dark and gloomy, nor did they boldly use some human bones as accessories to produce a strong visual impact. Instead, it was more in the style of the northern continent. Furthermore, there was an undeniable hint of Intis influence. Every column was covered in segmented gold foil. The use of colors in the murals were warm, and there were sculptures embedded with gold. A beautiful spiral staircase descended from above, connecting all 4 stories before ending in the middle of the huge hall where it faced the entrance. It was extremely grand. I have to say that countries led by the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun are really at the forefront when it comes to gold artwork. It doesn't have the feeling of the gaudy nouveau riche. Klein swept his gaze to the palm-sized golden angels that extended out from the staircase's railings and mid-sections of the columns, holding back his urge to caress them. Looking at the guards standing by the 2 sides, he casually found a topic and said to Haggis, "Colonel Alfred Hall seems to have made some significant contributions in West Balam?" Haggis nodded and used a Loanese noble accent to say, "He's a determined and brave man. He once led a special forces team of more than 30 men to raid an Intis battalion with more than 1,000 people, completely crippling them. I heard that he had also made significant contributions in East Balam, therefore, becoming a colonel before the age of 30. Sounds impressive. Perhaps Miss Justice's brother has already become a Beyonder with quite a significantly high sequence. In every aristocratic family, every generation should have some members taking the Beyonder path. Heh. If this Mr. Alfred finally reaches his goal of becoming a Beyonder with a relatively high sequence and gaining the rank of Brigadier General or Major General through hardship, I wonder how sad would he be when he returns to Baklan to realize that he's no match for his sister's dog." Having drank his medicine before heading out today, Klein used the act of lampooning to adjust his mental state. He didn't ask further about Alfred as he asked with a curious tone, "I realize that there are some differences in the traditions of East and West Balam. Here, in many houses, there are people with human bone decorations, but it's not present in East Balam. I've been here several times, but I've never been able to bring myself to get the answer to this question." Haggis stopped and pointed to the exaggerated spiral staircase. "Mr. Dantes, the general will be here in a few minutes." After informing him of this, he chuckled. It's actually not common to see human bone traditions. Only fiefs that came under the royal family of the Balam Empire still have this tradition. To us, the death of family members doesn't mean that our relationship has come to an end. After the burial, we will take a piece of their bones and place it at home as a decoration as a way to indicate that the deceased continue being with the living. As for which bone to choose, it will be decided by the interring priest through a ritual. The best and most symbolic part is the skull. Some families will even make the skull into a vessel for drinking alcohol, using it only when entertaining the most honored guests. Mr. Dantes, if you close a deal this time, I wish to invite you home. I wish to offer finest wine in my grandfather's skull to show my respects to you." 211 Klein's expression nearly fell apart. He felt that he was incapable of accepting the local customs in this aspect. He laughed and was just about to be perfunctory when he saw a figure slowly walking down the golden railings of the staircase. The person didn't wear a hat. He was wearing a cut black military attire with shimmering gold buttons. The sash he wore was red like blood. He had light brown skin and a rather soft facial outline. His facial features looked scrunched up in the middle of his head, making his face appear abnormally big. Klein, who had obtained the relevant information from various channels, instantly recognized the man to be the dominant ruler of West Balam's northern state. He was May Sanchez, who declared himself as general. On the surface, he wavered between the factions of Lone, Intis, Fainapotter, Faisak, and the resistance, maintaining a balance, but secretly, he had received the support of the numinous Episcopate's royal family faction. Meanwhile, Klein suspected that this native general had established a solid working relationship with the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. As for May Sanchez's strength, be it Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina or Admiral of Stars Catlia, he was noted to be a Sequence 5. But the 2 ladies didn't mention which pathway he was from, as the powers this local general exhibited were mostly related to spirits, but he carried a mystical item from the death pathway. "Good afternoon, Your Excellency." Klein took off his hat, pressed his hand to his chest, and bowed. At this moment, he sensed gazes locking onto him from some unknown location. They were like lights that flashed across the golden angel figures, the sunlight reflected from the stained glass or the lustrous glow from the smooth marble. "Hello there, Mr. Dantes," May Sanchez replied in Dutanese. Having grasped Dutanese through his marionette, Klein naturally was able to understand him. However, in the southern continent, the longer he stayed in East and West Balam, the more he felt the similarities between Dutanese and ancient Faisak. Although these 2 languages obviously followed different systems, making it much more difficult if he were to truly study Dutanese, certain details were shockingly similar, as it was as though they shared a common heritage. Klein could only be certain that the heritage wasn't Jotun. Pretending as though he hadn't noticed anything, he very naturally chatted with May Sanchez until the other party raised the topic of the arms deal. "How many goods do you have in total?" Klein laughed and replied, "It wouldn't be a problem equipping 3,000 to 4,000 people. In addition, there will be a few cannons." May Sanchez fell silent and said, "Name your price." Klein pretended to deliberate and said, "If you wish for me to send the goods to the northern state, the price would be £50,000. If you send your troops to retrieve the goods with me and be responsible for the subsequent transportation and safety, it will only cost £40,000. May Sanchez thought and said, "The latter. Take the down payment and go with my men. Once they see the goods and move it onto our carriages, my men will pay the rest." He paused for a moment and then added, "However, I do not have much lone gold pounds. So you don't have enough foreign reserves." Klein surveyed the area and said with an unconcerned smile, "You can directly pay me in gold coins, or even gold bars or gold bricks." May Sanchez was rather decisive. He didn't waste any time to nod and say, "Deal. I'll get Haggis to bring my men and money to you tomorrow." "Not bad. I like doing business with people who don't haggle." Klein first heaved a sigh of relief before suspecting if his price was too low. After Klein left the general's residence, May Sanchez suddenly looked up and said to the person above, "Your Excellency Luca, is this the person you're waiting for?" One story above the beautiful staircase, a figure slowly appeared. He was an elder in a white robe with inlaid brass lines. His hair was completely white and neatly combed. His pair of gray-green eyes were so deep that they appeared bottomless. He replied with an unhurried tone, "There's no way to be certain. Although my prophecy tells me that I'll meet the person who can resolve my future predicament in the next 2 days here, that person was too ordinary. Besides being a beyonder, there's nothing worth taking note of. Of course, I can't tell the more profound truth. He might have an existence that's at least not weaker than me behind him." Having said that, he slowly walked down and after a few seconds, said, "I'll attempt to use a dream to see if I can discover more. Do I need to prepare a special room for you?" May Sanchez asked reverently. Lucas shook his head. "I'll use the activity room here. The best time will be 4 hours later. Don't disturb me before that happens." He then entered the room, sat down, and leaned against the sofa. He relaxed himself, closed his eyes and fell silent. Only when it slowly turned dark did the old gentleman fall asleep. In the dream, he found himself standing in the hall of the general's residence, standing at the first floor of the beautiful staircase. By the side was May Sanchez and numerous guards. The middle-aged man named Duane Dantes was standing opposite him when he suddenly curled his lips into a smile, revealing an exaggerated smile. Flames soared up as poker cards fell from above. Luca's green eyes instantly darkened as Duane Dantes's body instantly fell into a strange darkness that appeared. The old white-robed gentleman immediately spread his arms open, revealing a dark vortex at his chest. The vortex expanded and devoured Duane Dantes. Before Luca could confirm the situation, he felt something. He turned to the side and saw May Sanchez's face squirming and turning tall before instantly becoming another Duane Dantes. Almost at the same time, Haggis and all the guards present turned into Duane Dantes. All of them were casting their gaze at Luca. Luca was jolted awake, and under the watch of May Sanchez, who had entered at some point in time, he faltered for 2 seconds and said heavily, "I have to personally meet that gentleman from before and see the demigod behind him." Before he finished his sentence, he subconsciously turned his head to look out the window. At this moment, the street lamps lit up. It was dark outside, and the crimson moon's moonlight was strangely tainted with a bloody color. Another blood moon. Thankfully there's Mr. Fool. I must say that there are way too many blood moons this year. It's only been 2 months since the last time. I didn't even have any time to prepare. Furs, who sat up, wiped her cold sweat, and muttered silently. She had arrived at a town near Dallaire Forest and had checked into a hotel. She shared a room with Zio, and they had made preparations to do some investigations of the abandoned castle early tomorrow morning. To Furza's surprise, there was a blood moon just as she was preparing to get some rest. At this moment, she seemed to recall something as her body stiffly turned to the side. Zio, who had exhorted her to sleep early, had already woken up at some point in time. She was looking at her with her eyes open. Chapter 954 Strange Ancient Castle. Furza's gaze met Zio's in midair as both parties remained silent. After a while, Furz chuckled dryly. "Haha, You haven't fallen asleep? Xiao frowned and said, What happened to you? Nothing. Didn't I tell you before? Whenever the full moon happens, I won't be in a good state. It's even worse during the blood moon, Furs replied as though everything was normal. Xiao sized her up and pulled her blanket. I remember that you brought sleeping pills? There's no need for that. I'm fine now. Seeing that Xiao wasn't pressing further, Furs secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Go back to sleep. We still have to head into the forest early tomorrow morning. Xiao didn't say another word as she turned around, gripped the blanket, and closed her eyes. Before long, her breathing turned heavier and became more drawn out and uniform. Furs stared blankly at the ceiling as her thoughts ran wild. At some point in time, she fell asleep as well. The next day at noon, in the core region of Delaire Forest, in front of a collapsed, ancient castle covered in green vines. Furs wiped the perspiration on her forehead and exhaled. We're finally here, Xiao shot her a glance and said. The boss at the hotel told me that we only need 2 hours to get here. They had set off before 6 in the morning, but they had spent nearly 7 hours to arrive. The corners of Furs's lips twitched as she said, Ideal conditions and reality are different. There weren't any trails for us to take towards the end. We needed to explore and forge a new path ourselves. Xiao took out her triangular blade, nodded and said, You should have foreseen this from the beginning, but you refused to have a guide as suggested by the hotel's boss. As an astrologer, I don't believe such trivialities will cause any trouble. Look, aren't we there now? Besides, the time is perfect. The wraiths and ghosts are definitely in their weakest state. Having forced a smile, Furs held Lemino's travels in one hand as she pointed with the other. I didn't notice it before, but the more I think about it, the more puzzled I become. About what? Xiao also cast her gaze to the ancient abandoned castle that was covered by vines. Furs casually found an excuse. Tell me, who would build a castle in the middle of a forest? Furthermore, they didn't open up a trail to it. Before she finished her sentence, she really found the matter a little odd. Xiao thought and said, Perhaps there was a trail, but after the castle was abandoned, whatever traces of it had been wiped out with time. Furs stroked the hair by her ear and shook her head. Then why would they abandon it? If they had considered safety back when building it, it would be more dangerous building it far from the town in an uninhabited castle. If it's just for vacations, with the way nobles do things, they wouldn't abandon it even if the maintenance and repairs are difficult. Xiao blurted out. Could it be because it's haunted? Furs thought for a few seconds. Won't someone who can build such a huge castle hire beyonders to deal with the ghosts? I suspect that the 3 churches and the kingdom's government don't know of this ancient castle. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense that they will leave the beyonder ingredients inside. Upon saying that, she raised a possibility. An ancient castle of the sanguine? Such extraordinary creatures enjoyed living in places with few people. Furthermore, they were usually connected to dark forests and ancient castles. In addition, information about this ancient castle came from the sanguine to begin with. It's possible, Xiao first agreed before disagreeing. Will the sanguine be afraid of ghosts? They definitely have the means to deal with the ancient wraiths inside. Makes sense. Don't tell me those sanguine don't like money and don't care about the search for beyonder ingredients? Furs recalled Mr. Moon's behavior and denied her hypothesis. In deliberation, she said, unless there's some problem that's not easy to resolve. That's what made the bigwigs choose to skirt around it. In that case, her operation would become more dangerous than she had anticipated. Xiao tersely agreed. Let's do some preliminary investigations while the sun is still strong. All right. Furs held Lemino's travels and approached the half-collapsed ancient castle one step at a time. The two soon arrived at the entrance, which was 2/3 blocked by rocks. They discovered that, beneath the green vines, the stone walls were mottled and heavily weathered as though it had been in existence for a very, very long period of time. Xiao wasn't in a rush to enter. Calling out to Furs, they circled around the castle slowly. When they returned to the entrance, she said in puzzlement, This castle style is purely defensive. It doesn't seem to consider the problems needed for living in it. Besides, many of the peculiarities of the building are ones I haven't heard of before. It has probably existed in the late 4th epoch or even earlier. What's there to defend again? Beast men? Trey ants? They've all gone extinct after the cataclysm. Haha, don't tell me that it's a building from the 2nd or 3rd epoch. Furs casually replied. She observed the terrain and left the entrance with Xiao before arriving at a relatively complete wall. She reached out her palm and pressed on it. Although she lacked combat experience, she was rather skilled when it came to the various aspects before a battle. An illusory light appeared in front of her, allowing Furs and Xiao to instantly enter the abandoned castle. The first thing that they saw was a collapsed staircase and layers of remnant concrete from above. There were rays of pure sunlight shining in from above, as well as masonry and rotten wood. There weren't any animal or bird feces or any green weeds on the ground. With a whoosh, the wind seeped into their bones, chilling them despite it being noon. Furs activated her spirit body and surveyed the area, but she failed to see any spirit bodies. However, she noticed that on the right of a remnant collapsed wall, there was a rather intact stone staircase. The staircase was mottled and scuffed as it extended downwards to an unknown location. "Shall we head over there to take a look?" Furs shot a glance at Xiao and made a suggestion. From her point of view, everything else in the castle could either be taken in at a glance or collapsed and stacked together. If they wished to do thorough investigations, it was certain that it would take a rather long amount of time. Therefore, it was better to gain a general understanding of the overall picture to assure themselves. Xiao glanced around and nodded gently. "The cold wind is gathering underground. I suspect that all the wraiths and ghosts are hidden in the area where the staircase leads to." "Yeah." Furs cautiously walked towards the mottled stone staircase and followed the steps, which were covered in gravel, down. The staircase was rather narrow, allowing only one person to pass at a time. Furthermore, they spiraled down, leaving Furs shaken. Tap, tap, tap. As their footsteps echoed into the distance, the light that shone inside the staircase darkened. Xiao lit the lantern in her hand as Furs opened Lamino's Travels, swiping a page with great familiarity. A bright and warm light burst out, illuminating the mottled stairs ahead of them. Tensed, Furs and Xiao walked down one level at a time. On the way, cold wind blew past them, making them overreact and nearly caused them to launch attacks at non-existent enemies. Tap, tap, tap. In the narrow and silent environment, Furs finally walked down the steps and stepped onto rather flat and solid ground. She had originally wanted to say, being in a place like this for too long will really make one go mad, but due to the silent and heavy atmosphere around her, she didn't make a sound. She was afraid that breaking the silence would result in extremely terrible developments. Using the blob of light that was floating above her, Furs cast her gaze forward in an attempt to see what was at the end of the staircase. It was a huge hall that was nearly 10 meters tall. There were black tiles laid on the ground with water droplets seeping out. There were signs of damage everywhere. Dozens of meters away, where the light nearly failed to illuminate the other end of the hall, there was a pair of double bronze doors sitting there silently. It went from the bottom to the top, and the rocks on the walls to its side had peeled off. The statues were in shambles, revealing the dark brown mud underneath. The surface of the door was engraved with dense symbols and strange patterns. They had a very mysterious and heavy feel, as though they were sealing something or blocking out something. Furs finally couldn't help but say with a hushed tone, "Have you seen such large doors before?" Beside her, Xiao shook her head. "No." Furs immediately drew a gasp. "Say, what could be behind that door? Where does it lead to? See, could it be the reason for building this castle in the first place? To prevent the creatures behind the door from coming out?" Xiao circled the area but didn't find any murals that could provide any information. All she found was that the closer she was to the bronze door, the more water seeped out from the ground. There were also more and more abandoned silver-black swords on the ground. During the 4th and 5th epoch, murals were very common in all castles and buildings. And before the cataclysm, it can be seen from various elvish ruins that supernatural creatures similarly liked to use murals to praise their deities and to record their daily lives. Xiao said slowly, using her experience and knowledge from being a bounty hunter. Furs nodded slightly and said, "That's indeed the case. This ancient castle is more magical than I imagined." At this moment, she felt hesitant. She even had thoughts of leaving and seeking Mr. World's help. Having heard Little Sun describe so many horror stories when exploring abandoned ruins at the tarot gatherings, her mind couldn't help but wander when placed in a similar situation. She was scaring herself. "Perhaps we can gather more clues by going closer." Xiao boldly took a few steps forward and approached the heavy sealed door that seemed to lead somewhere. Furs gripped Lamino's Travels tightly and hurriedly chased after her. As she walked, she suddenly saw bright redness appear before her. What seeped out from the cracks of the black tiles was no longer water but staggering blood. "This..." Furs immediately flipped open the notebook with a bronze-green cover and cast her sight on Xiao through the corner of her eye. It was unknown when Xiao had turned pale. Her eyes were dark green, and her lips were red. The area around her was dark and gloomy as her expression looked extremely distorted. Chapter 955 Ancient Wraith. Furz's pupils dilated as though she was trying to absorb more light into her eyes to better see Xiao's current circumstances. Meanwhile, the light in front of her suddenly exploded with a flash several times more blinding than old-school cameras, blanketing the surroundings with whiteness. Following that, her finger swiped on a page on Lamino's travels as black fog soared from her feet, enveloping her entire body. The thick black fog quickly transformed into palm-sized illusory bats as they flew in different directions of the underground hall. This was Wings of Darkness, which the moon had recorded in Lamino's travels. Its original use was to enhance one's speed and bestow temporary flight capabilities while producing a horde of blood-sucking bats to attack the enemy. However, Furs didn't use it for this purpose. Instead, she used it as a prop for her performance. After the illusory bats flew away, the space where Furs stood was already empty. At some point in time, she had appeared more than 10 meters away. After subconsciously escaping and defending herself, Furs could finally calm down as she hurriedly cast her gaze onto Xiao, who had turned abnormal. However, Xiao only appeared to have slightly disheveled blonde hair with malt-colored skin due to her continuous forays out in the sun. Besides looking somewhat blank as though she was surprised as to why her friend had such a huge reaction, she didn't show any signs of being influenced by wraiths or ghosts. Soraz, what happened? Xiao asked warily. Furs narrowed her eyes without directly replying to her. Flipping through Lamino's travels' pages, she asked, Xiao, how tall are you? Seemingly realizing something, Xiao answered, 152. Isn't that so? Just as she said that, Furz's fingers slid across the notebook's page, which was filled with symbols and magical labels. Silently, a holy light swirling with fire plummeted down from above. The unadulterated and bright light instantly enveloped Xiao before rippling outward with sunlight. As the blazing light stabbed into Furz's eyes, she saw the hall collapse and the surrounding space shatter like glass. This feeling was gone in a flash as Furs realized that she was still in her original spot. She had yet to flee. That was an illusion? She hurriedly turned to the side and saw Xiao looking at the damaged region of the heavy door. Furs deliberated for a moment and asked, Xiao, how tall are you? Xiao glanced at her and angrily said, Stop asking such inane questions. Phew, she's real. Furs heaved a sigh of relief as she quickly described her encounter to Xiao. After a few seconds of thought, Xiao used her lantern-wielding hand to nudge Furz's arm. Let's retreat. Perhaps the closer we are to that door, the easier it is to hallucinate. Yes, that's possible. Furs nodded in agreement as she quickly moved back a few steps. Following that, she surveyed the area and asked in puzzlement, Why can't we find any wraiths or ghosts here? Such an environment should be something that they enjoy. Xiao was perplexed as well. She then did a careful observation before landing her gaze on the blob of sunlight floating above Furz's head. Try extinguishing it, she suggested. Furs came to a realization as she immediately dispelled the light. Silent darkness blanketed the area and ruled the underground hall once more. Only the lantern's faint yellow light put up a resistance against all of this. Then, Furs saw two figures in her spirit vision. They were rather close to the bronze door. One was a female with coiled hair, wearing a knight's trousers and a garish shirt for ease of movement. The other was a man wearing silver-black armor as he held a sword that was almost snapping due to rust. The former's face was a blur as it kept wandering between the door and where Furs and Xiao arrived. The latter was loitering beside the door, muttering something. These are the two ancient wraiths? Furs nudged Xiao and said with a suppressed voice, I see spirit bodies. I see them as well. They aren't hiding at all. Xiao curved her back as she readied herself for a fight. Furs hurriedly nudged her. Don't be hasty. We aren't sure that they're the targets. She attempted to take 3 steps forward, but the two relatively blurry figures didn't even look at her. Furs thought and suddenly said, Ma'am, what are you doing? She had heard of stories in other mysticism circles that wraiths, shadows, and other higher-level spirit body creatures could be communicated with. However, she regretted it the moment she said that. This was because communication didn't allow her to achieve her goal. There was no way she could persuade the other party to kill themselves and hand over the cursed item and remnant spirituality of an ancient wraith. Just as Furs was considering if she should launch a direct attack, the lady in the garish shirt and knight's trousers replied with a flat tone, "I'm searching for my husband. He's a god here. Communication is really possible." Furs pressed out of curiosity. "Where did he go?" At this moment, Zio approached as she wore a look of extreme vigilance. The blurry-figured lady answered blankly. "He's a guard here. He told me that magical power seeps out from behind the door, corrupting his teammates. He got me to leave as quickly as possible with a messenger. He said that he would ensure that I escaped safely, but I don't wish for that. I want to leave with him." After sending off the messenger, I returned midway and returned underground. But I can't find him. With the age of this castle exceeding the present epoch, the last defender has definitely transformed into an ancient wraith. This lady's story has moved me. I really can't bear to attack her. Furz's mind whirled as she carefully took a few steps and circled around the ancient female wraith and approached the bronze door. This time, she and Zio didn't suffer any more hallucinations. This seemed to imply that her encounter was subconsciously created by the lady. A distance from the silver-black armored knight with a rusty sword, Furs attempted to ask, "Sir, what are you doing?" The knight paused and said with a humming voice, "I'm guarding this door of blackness. I need to ensure that my wife has escaped safely. If you meet her, tell her that her knight will fight for her to the very last moment." Door of blackness. It's clearly a bronze door. Wait, what did he say? He said that he's guarding the door to ensure that his wife can safely escape? Isn't this the other half of that woman's story which she described? This is her husband? Furs was taken aback as she kept looking back and forth between the two ancient wraiths. The lady wearing a garish shirt and knight's trousers slowly approached the bronze door before returning to the middle of the hall repeatedly. As for the silver-black armored man, he was patrolling about the door with a rotting sword in hand. At times, they would pass by without noticing each other. Such a scene must have gone on for at least 1,500 years, or even longer. Furs commented silently as she turned to glance at Zio. She realized that her friend's eyes were already welling with tears. What an easily touched person. Furs couldn't help it as she shouted at the female wraith. "Look at the door. Your husband has been there all along." The lady slowed down her pace and first glanced at Furs before casting her gaze at the heavy door. Her blank gaze penetrated the knight, landing behind him. "Why can't I find him?" The wraith repeated her words and repeated her actions. Furs felt an inexplicable sense of sorrow, and just as she was about to shout again, she saw the knight turn to look at her and Zio. He shouted, "Who are you?" Just as he said that, the female wraith cast her gaze at Zio and Furs again. Furs immediately felt her thoughts slow down as a coldness quickly formed inside her body and rippled out, freezing her flesh and joints. As for Zio, she too was suffering from the same condition. The area around the lantern dimmed significantly. At this moment, 2 bolts of lightning lit up in Zio's eyes. This made the wraith let out a painful cry as his body turned faint. Zio instantly escaped from her frozen state and threw out the triangular blade in her hand towards the female wraith. Bolts of illusory lightning swirled around the triangular blade's tip, stabbing straight into the lady. Psychic lashing. The female wraith screamed as her body turned faint. Furs instantly snapped awake as she slid her fingers across the open Lamino's travels. Life seemed to immediately gather from the surrounding shadows, turning into a pitch-black chain that restrained the male wraith to the ground, sealing off his mouth. Abyss chains. Meanwhile, Zio rushed out, and with an illusory brand in hand, she stamped it on the female wraith. With her holding back the female wraith, Furz's actions became more composed. She flipped through Lamino's travels and slid her fingers. Silver lightning that branched out and blasted out of thin air, smiting the male wraith and turning the area into a lightning hellscape. Finally, a holy pillar of light that had flames swirling around it appeared. It enveloped the male wraith and completely purified him. With one enemy taken down, Furs immediately turned and dealt with the female wraith with Zio. She didn't hold back on using powers from Lamino's travels. She came up with wise combinations of them, and using Zio's suppression, she switched between restrainment powers and offense from time to time. Soon, they finished off their target. Everything fell silent as Furs heaved a sigh of relief. She then looked at the battlefield with a look of disbelief. Is that it? She originally imagined that 2 ancient wraiths had unique powers, and with their higher levels, they weren't something Subsequence 5 Beyonders could deal with. However, she realized that everything happened rather smoothly. This made her truly realize how godly Lamino's travels was. She also began looking forward to the next sequence as a scribe. Xiao was somewhat astonished as she thought for a few seconds. It's no wonder someone told me that, beneath the level of demigods, the number of beyonders, their cooperation, and usage of powers are more important than the sequence. Just as she said that, she heard knocking sounds resonate. It broke the silence of the hall, and it came from behind the bronze door. Chapter 956. The things behind the door. Bang. 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 Behind the bronze door, the slamming sounds continued incessantly, echoing throughout the vast underground hall as though they came from an abnormally distant past. Furs clamped up and couldn't help but tremble. Unable to help it, she suppressed her voice. What could be behind the door? I've no idea. Xiao honestly shook her head, subconsciously gulping. Her right hand, which had just picked up her triangular blade, had her joints protruding out as her blood vessels surfaced. Clearly, she was gripping the triangular blade tightly. Bang, bang, bang. The slamming sounds continued without any change in frequency. Each sound seemed to strike at Furz's and Xiao's hearts, leaving their hair standing and scalps tingling. It likely won't be able to come out, right? If it could so easily come out, it wouldn't have waited until today. Furz tried to console herself with parched lips. Xiao nodded heavily and said, "We leave once the ingredients form." In such an environment and atmosphere, her curiosity had been completely overwhelmed by her innate fear. All right. As Furz glanced at the spots where the two ancient wraiths had been cleansed, she blamed the moon for providing undetailed information. He hadn't mentioned that there was such a strange door beneath the ancient castle. At this moment, glowing dust was landing on the ground like shattered gems, forming into two piles as they gathered together. Around them, nearly formless remnant spirituality condensed into a seemingly ethereal crystal. Accompanied by the crystals and dust were two different items. One was ring-shaped and completely transparent as though it was a corroded ring. The other was an eye carved from crystal, with faint black gas swirling within. Upon seeing this scene, Fur suddenly realized something. An ancient wraith was a ghost-like creature with a beyonder characteristic mixed in. The cursed item would be related to a particular item while they were still alive, fusing with the characteristic and turning into a foundation to which they relied on for their existence. It was precisely because of this that different ancient wraiths had different corresponding cursed items in shape and form. However, they were essentially the same. And the dust was another type of characteristic. It was the source of most of their strength, stemming from remnant spirituality, slightly equivalent to the blood and ingredients of monsters. Bang, bang, bang. The entity striking behind the bronze door didn't let up at all. It kept testing Furz's and Xiao's psyche. Being afraid and cautious, the duo's bodies trembled so much that they even imagined that the door was shaking slightly. Their racing hearts were in their throats. With them being able to head for the staircase at any moment, Furz finally waited until the ancient wraith's powder and cursed items took form. As she signaled to Xiao to be wary, she crouched down and took out 3 square metal boxes she had prepared. After some hesitation, Furz looked up at Xiao and said, "These two ancient wraiths have been waiting for each other for so long. I am thinking of separating a little of what they left behind and burying them together. In that case, I'll get a cursed item, and you'll get a pile of dust. We'll split the remaining spirituality, all right?" Xiao didn't hesitate as she nodded. All right. Furz silently heaved a sigh of relief as she pursed her lips. Flipping through Lamino's travels, she slid her finger across a particular page. The 5 nails on her right hand immediately grew long and sharp, covering black patterns and symbols. This was the claw of corrosion from the sanguine. Upon seeing her palm transform, Furz grabbed at the ground, easily digging a hole and leaving behind a corrosive mark. Right on the heels of that, she placed the crystal eyeball-like cursed item and a pile of dust into the hole before filling the hole with the gravel and soil she had dug up. She lightly grazed the flattened ground with her fingernails, writing an epitaph. "Returning for you. Defending for you. Together forever." After doing all of this, Furz sighed when she heard the slamming behind the bronze turn louder. Bam! She jumped in fright and hurriedly placed the pile of dust, ring-shaped curse item, and remnant spirituality into the different square metal boxes. Then, she put the boxes away, stood up, and slowly walked to the spiraling and cramped staircase with Xiao. Bang! 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 The slamming sounds behind the bronze door grew intense as Furz and Xiao subconsciously gritted their teeth, following the staircase and rapidly heading up. They increased their speed until they began running. They ignored the possibility of falling on the staircase and tumbling down like a wheel. Finally, Furs and Zio saw sunlight. Sunlight beamed in from outside, shining upon the staircase ahead of them. It was bright, pure and warm. At this moment, the slamming sounds from underground had come to a sudden stop without any follow-up. Furs and Zio exchanged looks, slowed down their pace, and after a few large strides, returned to the top of the abandoned ancient castle. The duo didn't say a word and directly left the area, returning to the periphery of the forest. After walking for some time, Furs calmed down and pursed her lips. It was really terrifying. Although the thing behind the bronze door didn't deal any harm to us, nor did it even show itself, I think it was more terrifying than the ancient wraiths. Compared to all my past experiences, it's far more terrifying. In those few minutes, I couldn't help but imagine all the different tragic deaths I might suffer. Each one was more terrifying than the last, but none of them were as terrifying as the slamming sounds. Zio turned her head and agreed with a nod. Yeah. I felt as though I was walking on the edge of a cliff. Furs was about to continue when she saw two streams of bright red blood flowing down Zio's nose. Zio, your nose is bleeding. Furs hurriedly warned her friend. Zio was taken aback as her pupils dilated. You too. Furs blankly reached out her hand and wiped her nose. It felt warm to the touch, wet and sticky. She was appalled as she hurriedly held her right hand in front of her and saw red blood smeared across it. It was bright and striking. A result from being overly anxious? Furs muttered in puzzlement. At this moment, through the sunlight diffusing through the forest's canopy, she realized that faint black spots were quickly growing on her wrists at a discernible pace. The black spots rapidly spread, covering her arms and the back of her hands. Furs subconsciously cried out as she hurriedly looked at Zio. She saw Zio's cheeks and neck covered with black spots. This isn't normal. Furs blurted out. Zio sensed the abnormality happening to the both of them as she recalled and said, Do you still remember what that female wraith said? She said that the guards from before had been corrupted by the forces that seeped out from behind the bronze door. Could it be that we've been corrupted? Furs was taken aback for a second before she nodded heavily. It's possible. She hurriedly took out the medicine that she had prepared, handing over some of it to Zio. Then, she twisted the lid off and downed 2 bottles. However, they didn't show any signs of recovering. The black spots grew in number, turning their vision blurry. Badump! Badump! Before long, Furs, whose efforts to save herself were in vain, could hear her heartbeat and sense her body beginning to lose strength. Out of ideas, she quivered her lips, clenched her teeth, and turned her body around. She took a few steps to open up a distance from Zio. Then, she bowed her head and chanted Mr. Fool's honorific name. In about 10 seconds, she saw dark red light appear, engulfing her like the tide. The ravings and roaring vanished and Furs saw the familiar mottled table and the 10 high-backed chairs opposite her. She then realized that her dizziness and blurred vision had vanished. There weren't any more of the strange accentuated black spots on her spirit body. Thank you for your help. Furs hurriedly stood up and bowed at the figure shrouded in grey fog at the end of the long bronze table. Then, she heard Mr. Fool say in a calm tone, Your spirit had been corrupted by some force. It should be fine now. Cleansed by Mr. Fool? Furz's heart stirred. Just as she wanted to make a request to Mr. Fool regarding how Zio could be saved, the scene before turned red as light soared up. After a brief pause, she found herself in the real world, back in Delaire Forest. The black spots on the back of her hands and wrists were rapidly fading and receding. The blood that kept dripping from her nose had already come to a stop. Returning to her body, she saw Zio weakly slumped on a tree. Her face was covered in black spots, making her look terrifying. The muscles on both sides of her neck were tensed up as her mind spun. A few seconds later she walked over quickly, pressed Zio on the shoulders and rapidly said, I have a way to save you, but you need to follow my instructions. Use ancient Hermes to say this. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. Zio could hardly turn her swollen eyelids. Looking at Furs for 2 seconds, she heavily chanted, The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the grey fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Just as she said that, Zio saw dark red starlight surge out from the void, sweeping over her. Indescribable roars continued for a second before vanishing from Zio's ears. She then saw herself seated in an ancient and majestic palace. She was sitting beside a mottled, bronze table. At her feet was a boundless grayish-white fog. In front of her was a lofty figure looking down upon her. This scene was both unfamiliar and familiar to her. She had once seen it in a dream, but she hadn't ever had it again after the exorcism ritual. That purification was actually useless. Xiao suddenly had this thought as she stood up in deliberation, bowing at the figure enshrouded in gray fog. "You are the great king of yellow and black?" She didn't appear too surprised or alarmed, as though she had already expected it. "You can call me Mr. Fool. Have a seat," the figure with an epic aura replied calmly. Xiao bowed again and sat down, confirming that she had escaped her unwell state. She looked to her sides and thought before asking, "Honorable Mr. Fool, does Fur's wall have a seat here?" Shrouded in the gray fog, the fool nodded gently and said yes. Xiao fell silent for a second and directly asked, "Can I join just like her?" The fool chuckled. "It's a gathering they organized on their own accord but is convened by me. There's still a seat available at present. You may join. Draw a card." They use one of the major arcana cards as their code name. Xiao didn't ask or speak further. She immediately nodded. "Yes, Mr. Fool." On the bronze table in front of her, a deck of tarot cards immediately appeared. Xiao reached out her right hand and solemnly cut the deck, pulled out one card, and flipped it over. Her card depicted an angel with a trumpet and the sleeping dead awaiting salvation, the Judgment card. Chapter 957. Getting to know each other. Looking at the Judgment card in hand, Xiao was taken aback. "This greatly meets my expectations." Shrouded in the gray fog, the fool nodded and calmly said, "The gathering is held here at 3 in the afternoon on Mondays, Baclan time. Be prepared. During the gathering, you can exchange information, ingredients, formulas, and knowledge. You can also pay a certain price to entrust missions to the other members." Xiao recalled for a moment before nodding in enlightenment. "Yes, Mr. Fool." Believing that this was all for the day, she heard the voice coming from the end of the bronze table. "What did you do before being corrupted by that force?" "We really were corrupted." Xiao composed herself and completely recounted her exploration of the ancient castle with furs. She emphasized the bronze door which had been named the Door of Blackness, as well as the ancient castle's guard that had been reduced to a wraith due to the corruption. Then, she noticed Mr. Fool nod slightly as he said calmly, "Don't enter that ancient castle again before you reach sequence 4. It's time for you to return." Xiao then got up, and following the descriptions in the religious rituals, she bowed and said, "Your wish is my wish." Just as she said that, the dark red color surged in front of her. After everything dissipated, she was back in the real world and leaning against a thick tree. Subconsciously looking at the back of her hand, she realized that the black spots were rapidly turning faint. Xiao looked up at Furs, who was staring at her worriedly. As their gazes met, Furs was first delighted before revealing a smile. She opened her mouth but was at a loss for words. Xiao slowly exhaled and pointed ahead. "Let's first return to the town." "All right," Furs answered without any hesitation. At this moment above the gray fog, the fool Klein was tapping on the edge of the mottled table as he considered Miss Magician and Miss Judgment's encounter. The object or power sealed behind the Door of Blackness could still corrupt the guards and explorers outside, even without escaping. Just the mere thought of it was terrifying. Furthermore, this corruption stemmed from the spirit body. To resolve it, Klein had only two solutions. One was to make the corrupted entity hold a complete secret deed ritual as he used the powers above the gray fog and the sun brooch to complete a purification. The other was to directly pull the spirit body over, using the gray fog to cleanse them. As he didn't have the luxury of time, he had chosen the latter. What could it be? The most corruptive power belongs to the devil pathway. That place connects to the abyss? That's not impossible. Based on Little Sun's description, during the early and mid stages of the second epoch, devils often left the abyss and were active over the land. It was only when the ancient sun god appeared, causing ancient gods to perish one after another, did they retreat into the abyss and seal themselves in. Based on that, it's rather normal to have an underground ancient entrance in the northern continent to lead to the abyss. It can also be imagined that a castle is built with men sent to watch over it. But the problem lies in the fact that it's been millennia. Why would there still be an existence slamming the door? Are the devils planning on returning? Klein made a preliminary guess. He temporarily had no plans on exploring the abandoned castle to verify his thoughts, because it was unlikely that there would be any changes anytime soon. After all, since it was news that came from the Sanguine, he could get the Moon Emlyn to do some gathering of information to figure out the history of the castle. Reigning in this thought, Klein removed the topaz chain from his wrist and divined if the matter regarding the ancient castle was pressing. He received a negative answer. He immediately returned to the real world and waited for the local ruler, General May Sanchez, to send over the down payment. At 2 in the afternoon, Faina Pottertime, Haggis, with his hair combed backward while dressed as a Northern Continent gentleman, carried a black leather suitcase with a team of guards as he knocked on Dwayne Dantes' door. "Please come on in." A warm and elegant voice sounded from the inside. It was first Loanese in a Backland accent before it was changed to the local language of Dutanese. Haggis turned the doorknob and entered. He saw Dwayne Dantes with his white sideburns and deep blue eyes stand up from his reclining chair while pressing down the ends of his black vest. "Good afternoon, my friend." This lone gentleman with good looks and bearings took 2 steps forward and extended his right palm. This time, he switched to using Loanese. Haggis replied using the accent of a Loanese noble. "It's my honor to be your friend." After he shook hands with Dwayne Dantes, he surveyed the area and chuckled. "Is this your servant?" He pointed at a mixed-blood youth standing behind the arms dealer. In between the lines, he was asking if he was trustworthy. After all, Dwayne Dantes hadn't brought any servants back when he visited the general's residence yesterday. Yes, his greatest strength is the ability to keep secrets. Dwayne Dantes smiled as he pointed to the leather sofa across the reclining chair. With 2 guards following Haggis, he closed the door and sat down. He then said with a smile, "I've heard of an Intis proverb that's said to be from Emperor Roselle. He said that dead men tell no tales." Dwayne Dantes said with a laugh. "Emperor Roselle also said something else. Corpses can speak." "Is that so?" "This is my first time hearing of this." Haggis enjoyed conversing with a Northern Continent gentleman, so they continued their conversation for a while before he lifted up the leather suitcase beside him and opened it. At that instant, there seemed to be overflowing golden lusters. Under the illumination from the sunlight outside, the entire room seemed to brighten significantly. Haggis then looked at Dwayne Dantes and said, 5,000 lone gold pounds, as well as 5,000 gold coins and gold bars. This is the down payment. I'll bring along the remaining 30,000 pounds in cash and gold the entire time, and we'll hand it over when the arms deal is completed." Dwayne Dantes scanned the stacks of cash, the gold coins, and gold bars in the leather suitcase before retracting his gaze and saying with a smile, "When do we set off?" Haggis closed the leather suitcase and handed it to Dwayne Dantes' servant and said simply, "Tomorrow morning." He paused for 2 seconds before saying, "Mr. Dantes, the general has a guest who would like to meet you." Dwayne Dantes' expression didn't change as he fell silent for a few seconds. "When?" "Now," Haggis said without daring to show any signs of being perfunctory. "He's downstairs." Dwayne Dantes nodded slightly. "Please invite him up." Haggis immediately heaved a sigh of relief and left with his guards. They followed the stairwell down. Before long, Luca, in a simple white robe with brass lines adorning it, walked up. His silver hair had been combed very neatly. When he arrived by Dwayne Dantes' door, he heard a voice from the inside just as he raised his hand. "Please come in." This time they spoke using ancient Fasak. Luca's expression didn't change as he naturally pushed open the door. He then saw the middle-aged gentleman who had rather good looks and qualities from yesterday standing beside a reclining chair facing him. And sitting on the reclining chair was a young man. He had black hair and brown eyes, with a thin, cut face. He had a cold temperament. Luca was taken aback as he took a step forward, entered the room and closed the door. After he sat down on the sofa in a composed manner, his gray-green eyes clearly reflected the young man in front of him. "Gairman Sparrow?" Luca addressed him with a rhetorical question. Gairman Sparrow curled the corners of his mouth. Directly addressing others by their full name is impolite. Luca nodded and said, "My apologies for my faux pas. I recall that you advanced to sequence 5 less than half a year ago, or it might have only been 3 months. Yes, it should have been completed when you were in the ruins of the battlefield of gods. I never expected that you were already a demigod. It left me a little bewildered." Gairman Sparrow smiled without giving any explanations. After a brief moment of silence, he said in an unhurried tone, "Why are you visiting me?" Luca calmly replied, "I don't know." The atmosphere in the room suddenly turned somewhat odd. Gairman Sparrow seemed to forget that there was an elderly man sitting opposite him that needed him to speak again. Luca indiscernibly nodded and said, This is the thing. I made a prophecy by chance not too long ago. In that prophecy, I will be in a rather thorny situation in the future. And one of the people I met with over these few days will help me deal with it. I'm not sure if it's you, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. So I decided to meet you and get to know each other. My name is Luca Brewster, a clergyman who serves the God of knowledge and wisdom. I'm presently in charge of various matters in West Balam. Gammon Sparrow nodded and said, "Not bad. I now know you. I don't believe I need to introduce myself, right?" Of course, Luca thought and said, "You should be a bizarro sorcerer. I recently received some intel that there has been some reshuffling among the secret order in Intis." He didn't see Gammon Sparrow reveal any looks of shock. This powerful adventurer, who was famous across the 5 seas, said after a moment of silence, "Zeratul has returned." The look in Luca's eyes changed immediately before being restored to normal. Then, he stood up and nodded. "Since we've gotten to know each other, it's time we bid farewell." After saying this, he walked to the door, twisted the doorknob, and left the room. Sitting on the reclining chair, Gammon Sparrow watched as his figure was concealed inch by the wooden door until he completely disappeared. Then he chuckled. What a charlatan. Yes. Dwayne Dantes, who was standing beside the reclining chair, found a seat and sat down. Then, he picked up a cup of tea and sipped from it. With white sideburns and deep blue eyes, he and the thin, angular-faced Gammon Sparrow exchanged looks and smiled in unison. On Monday afternoon, Dwayne Dantes took out his golden pocket watch, opened it, and said to Haggis opposite him, "We're almost arriving at our destination. I believe you and your men need some rest." An excellent suggestion. Haggis was rather agreeable. Dwayne Dantes pointed at the street ahead. "There's a hotel ahead. Let's rest there for half a day before we set off again tomorrow." Haggis didn't object to it as he turned to the front and instructed the carriage driver. After checking into the hotel, Dwayne Dantes declined Haggis's invitation for afternoon tea by using an afternoon nap as an excuse. Slightly more than half an hour later, above the boundless gray fog, Klein sat in the seat belonging to the Fool. Chapter 958. Labeling. Dark red beams shot up, materializing into different figures on both sides of the long bronze table. The unchanging silence above the gray fog was broken as the Eternal Palace seemed to have an additional, inexplicable sense of life to it. Just as Justice Audrey regained her senses of her surroundings, she prepared to stand up to greet the existence at the end of the long bronze table. At this moment, as a senior spectator, she acutely noticed a difference. There were 2 more members than last week. One of them was a man sitting to the right of Mr. Moon. The other was a lady sitting to the left of the Hermit. Audrey first felt happy that the Tarot Club was developing and becoming stronger, but then she kept to her professional instincts and quickly began observing due to where she sat. The man opposite her was much easier to observe compared to the lady 2 seats away from her. Therefore, she placed her attention on the man. Black hair. Green eyes. He doesn't wear a coat. A vest matched with a shirt. He sits a little oddly. He's not accustomed to sitting properly. He's probably about 180 centimeters tall. He has quite a desultory temperament. He's rather tense. At one glance, Justice Audrey had read plenty of information from the rather blurry figure. She then noticed something different. The man was quickly surveying his surroundings. Such an action wasn't a problem in itself. Anyone who came to this strange and secret location would definitely subconsciously size up the other members and attempt to grasp their traits and general situation so as to calm down. But the problem was that the man was moving his gaze too quickly. His gaze had swept past the moon, the hanged man, and the other members without pausing. To Audrey, this was a very clear phenomenon. It didn't mean that the man was observing his surroundings and studying the members, but that he was finding someone. He was looking for someone he had in mind. Audrey instantly felt a little excited, as she believed that this newcomer knew one of the members present. Who could it be? She observed for another second and realized that the man sitting diagonally opposite her had fixed his gaze on the world Gammon Sparrow. Audrey was thrilled as though she had discovered a secret. She thought in enlightenment, the newcomer is a friend of Mr. World, or it's at least the case that they know each other in the real world. He also knows that he's a Tarot Club member. Or it could also be said that Mr. World had inducted him into the gathering. No, that's not very possible. If that were the case, the newcomer would be much more certain. He wouldn't be eagerly searching for someone he knows. He definitely would have placed his gaze on the other members for a longer period of time. Furthermore, Such an action also proves that he's not abreast of Mr. Fool. What is his relationship with Mr. World? Audrey held on to her thoughts of continuing to observe as she stood up and turned to face the seat of honor. During this process, she took the opportunity to sweep her gaze at the new member sitting beside Ma'am Hermit. She's exchanging looks with Miss Magician. Her height. Zio has finally passed the test and joined the gathering? Upon identifying her, Audrey did a curtsy towards the figure shrouded in gray fog. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Just as she issued the brisk greeting, she realized something. Mr. Fool is a little different from before. This great existence seemed to be more one with the entire gray fog, palace, and space. His aura was lofty and mighty, like the sea or sky. This feeling isn't something that can be described with words. Mr. Fool has taken one more step to his awakening, allowing him to retrieve more of his authority over his divine kingdom? Audrey's eyes darted around, feeling curious and delighted, as well as a little sense of pride. At this moment, the hanged man Alger and the hermit Catlia had noticed the two new members. They noticed that the lady was a little short and was secretly exchanging signals with Miss Magician. She was both unfamiliar but also familiar with the tarot gathering. At the very least, she was unlike the man in the white shirt and black vest. He had frantically stood up only after everyone began bowing. In addition, they sensed that the new male member took special notice of the world Gairman Sparrow, causing them to have many guesses. These thoughts resonated in their minds, but they didn't express them. The hanged man and the hermit completed the usual first steps of the gathering with Miss Justice. As for the son Derek, he was just happy because the tarot club had new members again. The moon Emlyn had mixed feelings. On the one hand, he felt a sense of superiority being more senior compared to the newcomers, but on the other hand, he had a feeling that there were just too many messiahs for the apocalypse. After some searching, the star Leonard determined that the one sitting at the bottom end of the long bronze table was Klein Moretti. This was because his physical characteristics were similar to that of Gairman Sparrow's description. He's hiding his true identity. He doesn't relax even in such a secretive gathering, using 2 levels of disguises. I have to take note. Just as this thought flashed across his mind, Leonard saw the girl sitting to the left of Mr. Fool stand up. Then she led everyone into bowing. He was taken aback, failing to react in time. He stood out when amongst all the standing members. After a second, Leonard snapped back to his senses and hurriedly stood up to deliver the greeting. Opposite him, Zio glanced at him, equating him to Furs to a certain extent. Furs shared the same thought. However, she had equated the man with Zio to a certain extent. This was because Zio had appeared rather unreliable when they first met. This is the star, and this is judgment. Take your seats and introduce yourself. The Fool Klein raised his right hand and casually pointed. The name, the star, keeps making me think that it's the code name for a lady. As Leonard thought in exasperation, he focused and began labeling the members in the order of their introduction. Miss Justice. Seems like a young lady, but she might have donned 2 levels of disguise like Klein. She's rather optimistic and cheerful. Although I can't tell the details of her attire, it appears to be very classy. Mr. Hanged Man Burley. Restrained. He's likely to be a straightforward but rash person. Miss Magician. The way she looks at me is weird. From time to time, she will glance at Klein. I've no idea what's on her mind. She seems rather ordinary overall with nothing standing out. Mr. Sunday. He's very tall, but the way he speaks sounds like he's going through puberty. Although he's silent, he does seem rather friendly. Miss Hermita, Ma'am Hermit. She exudes a mature and staid demeanor. She's likely a very experienced beyonder. Mr. Moon. Rather young and looks a little reserved. Makes me feel like I've seen him somewhere before, but I can't recall it. I'll continue observing. Miss Judgment. Very short with very obvious traits. However, I can't be sure if she has donned 2 levels of disguises. The World. Very, very gloomy. This is likely his disguise. Well, it might also be his true nature. He wasn't a demigod before, meaning that this gathering has no lack of mid-sequence beyonders. I wonder if I'm the weakest one. As Leonard was observing the other members, Judgment Zio Cha was also using her powers as a sheriff to extract the traits of the different members and keeping them in mind. A noble lady. Sailor or a crew member. Rather young and introverted, but it's not serious. Rather strong. The leader of at least a mid-sized team. Arrogant, of pretty good family background. Desultory, not staid. Gloomy, Terrifying. Amidst their thoughts, the other members finished their self-introduction. The hermit Catlia looked towards the end of the long bronze table and said with a bow, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I didn't receive any new Roselle diary pages this time." Didn't receive? Does this mean that Queen Mystic didn't reply? I wonder what Bernadette is busy with. The Fool Klein nodded and calmly replied, "Begin the transactions then." As he said that, Audrey noticed the reactions of the hermit and the hanged man. She realized that they had yet to notice Mr. Fool turning loftier and sublime. Was I the only one who noticed it? Audrey darted her eyes slightly in thought, feeling somewhat poignant and a little happy. Of course, she also knew that Ma'am Hermit and Mr. Hanged Man didn't dare to look at Mr. Fool too much, especially the former. Most of the time, she only dared to look at the table edge in front of Mr. Fool. Table edge. There's an additional card of blasphemy. Audrey's gaze froze before she retracted it in pleasant surprise. With her intuition as a spectator, she was quite certain that the obtaining of the new card of blasphemy was likely to be the same matter as the World Gammon Sparrow's mental problems but with different outcomes. She hesitated for a moment and observed the area. I have nothing I need. Catlia, Derek, Emlyn, and Furs had already made preparations and were about to advance. Therefore, they didn't have any requests. Likewise for Alger, who was still digesting his potion. Instead, it was Leonard who had the desire to purchase a mystical item. However, with no one showing him an example, he was momentarily unsure how to begin. All he could do was divert some attention to considering Mr. Fool's need for Roselle diaries. After selling Tinder, he wasn't lacking in money. Furthermore, having had the experience using creeping hunger, he realized that having a powerful mystical item was rather useful. At this point, Furs looked at the silent Zio before looking opposite her. Mr. Hanged Man, I have a material that I wish to be made into a mystical item by that artisan. She was referring to the ancient wraith powder that Zio had. Alger shook his head. That artisan has been controlled by some members of the Rose School of Thought who believe in the primordial moon. That's all I know. The subsequent matters have been left to Ma'am Hermit to handle. Rose School of Thought. Primordial moon believers. Left to Ma'am Hermit to handle. Leonard and Zio looked around and suddenly realized that the gathering they were participating in wasn't as loose as they imagined. They were secretly traversing through the shadows of the world. Chapter 959. Even newcomers are different amongst themselves. Catlia turned her body slightly to the side and looked at the magician. It's a little complicated. I suggest that you wait for another 1 to 2 weeks. I'm unable to promise anything. All I can say is that there should be someone to help you create the mystical item when the time comes. Should be someone? It also means that it might not be the original artisan. Does this mean that she's planning on nurturing an artisan for herself? Or could it be that she's thinking of a way to turn the original artisan into a sealed artifact, using a machine to create machines? Ma'am Hermit is indeed an experienced beyonder. Leonard listened quietly while doing some analysis. It was the first time he was this serious during a meeting. No problem. Furs had the utmost confidence in Ma'am Hermit. After all, she had already obtained the mythical creature's blood and was likely to undergo a qualitative change in time. At this moment, she heard the world say with a hoarse voice, "If this matter requires my help, you can get my help." To Klein, the Mother Tree of Desire's abnormal interest in the grey fog, as well as Emperor Roselle's warning to be careful of the moon, which made him, who was determined to figure out the secret of transmigration and the door of light, take note of matters involving the Rose School of Thought and the primordial moon believers more than ever before. Furthermore, the artisan was now involved in both matters. Catlia never expected the world to offer his help. After some silence, she nodded slightly. All right. If I'm unable to handle it, I'll seek your help through Mr. Fool. She had deliberately said through Mr. Fool, to inform the two newcomers that the Tarot Club had a magical way of contacting one another. There was no need for them to be stumped or be in a dilemma in such aspects. It was something they would understand in due time. As the pirate admiral with the highest bounty across the 5 seas, and as a pirate crew leader of hundreds of subordinates, she wasn't doing this solely out of goodwill. Nor was she worried that the two newcomers would affect the progress of the gathering because of excessive questions. Instead, it was a way to assert dominance in front of newcomers. Of course, unless time was of the essence, leaving Catlia no time to set up a ritual, she would in fact rather summon Gammon Sparrow's messenger than trouble Mr. Fool. Seek help through Mr. Fool. Zio vaguely understood something and held back her urge to look at Furs. Seek help through Mr. Fool? Leonard's thoughts raced quickly as he made a guess. Seeing that someone had begun, he relaxed a little and deliberated for a few seconds. Then he said, "I need a mystical item." "What kind?" Audrey answered at the perfect time to prevent an awkward atmosphere from descending upon the area. Leonard verbally showed his indecision and subconsciously replied, "I don't know." He only had such a plan, but he hadn't thought carefully into the details. He only realized that there was this possibility after being pulled into the gathering. Doesn't know. Is he an idiot? The fool Klein, who knew Leonard's desultoriness and casualness, resisted the urge to laugh and criticized him inwardly. Seeing everyone's gaze fall on him with mixed expressions, Leonard immediately felt embarrassed as he hurriedly added, "I mean, there are no limits on the type. As long as it's geared towards offense, has rather stealth-oriented attributes, and lesser negative side effects, it would be fine by me." This was to boost his nightmare's control to its full extent. At times, he could control a target by himself while Palaz Zoroast controlled the mystical item, giving the dazed opponent a lethal strike. Once he became a spirit warlock, with a natural spirit or wraith or shadow sealed in his teeth to aid him. He could do 2 or even 3 things at a time. After Mr. Starr finished his explanation, Alger didn't harp over the details. He asked, "Roughly what level is needed?" "Somewhere around a grade 2 sealed artifact but slightly stronger. Corresponding to sequence 5 or 6. Leonard had habitually described the item using the parlance of an official beyonder before switching to more common terminology. At that instant, a thought flashed across the minds of Audrey, Katlia, Alger, and Zio. Mr. Starr is an official beyonder, or at least he once was. From their point of view, although beyonders that didn't belong to any official organization would at times use the concept of grades when describing sealed artifacts, they wouldn't consider using such a vague description when precision was needed in expressing their thoughts and requests. One would often choose a method of explanation that was more direct and easier to understand. Therefore, the conclusion easily appeared. This way, things turned way more interesting. Mr. World is actually very familiar with an official beyonder. How did they get to know each other? Why would he rope in an official beyonder into the tarot club? Audrey didn't say a word as she maintained her state as a spectator while enjoying herself. At this moment, Alger tersely acknowledged. "A mystical item at sequence 5 costs at least £9,000. For one that matches your request, it can typically exceed £12,000. Very frank." Leonard nodded. "I understand." After hearing his reply, Klein nearly face-bombed as he sighed inwardly. Aren't you showing your hidden card to Mr. Hanged Man by doing so? I dare bet that if he has something suitable, the price will definitely be above £12,000. Aside from the £7,000 from Tinder, Leonard still actually has other savings. With the guidance of a grandpa from the Marauder pathway, he has likely amassed quite a bit. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to purchase Tinder. I get it. He's not afraid of being fleeced, because he still can purchase from the Hermits of Fate. He can compare the traits and prices from both sides. But the problem is that gathering happens once every half a year. It's totally not at the tarot gatherings pace. At this moment in time, Klein couldn't help but consider selling items to the dear poet that had repeated effects or were of little use after becoming a demigod. He then heard Mr. Hanged Man reply in a deep and calm manner. "All right. I'll keep an eye out for you." "Okay." Katlia and the other members expressed their stance as well. Following that, there weren't any transactions, allowing the gathering to automatically enter the free exchange segment. Without waiting for Mr. Hanged Man to inquire, Derek raised his hand and said, "I'm already back in the City of Silver. The chief has informed me that we will begin another round of preliminary explorations of the Giant King's court shortly. Does he mean that I should make use of this time to advance to become a priest of light?" Giant King's court? Explorations of the Giant King's court? Leonard cast his gaze to the pubescent youth 1 seat away from him in surprise. From what he knew, the Giant King's court had already been destroyed long ago in the second epoch. Palaz Zoroast, as an angel, had already said that it had vanished from the rivers of time. To his surprise, the son of the Tarot Club was about to explore the area, but none of the members were astonished. Yes, not one of them. Leonard subconsciously looked at Miss Judgment, who was also a newcomer, but he realized that she was apparently aware of this and had remained rather calm. This Miss Magician has privately kept Miss Judgment up to speed. Only Leonard doesn't know anything. The fool Klein leaned into his seat and seriously analyzed himself. After he pulled Leonard above the grey fog and assigned him the star card, he had ignored him. He didn't even write to him or introduce the Tarot Club's general situation to him. Compared to women, men truly aren't meticulous with the details.
Klein was just about to control the world Gehrman to explain to the star Leonard when he saw the moon Emlyn glance at the poet beside him and say with a rather faint smile, "The giant king's court is in the forsaken land of the gods."
After saying that, he ignored Leonard's reaction, and he said to the sun, "Have you obtained the ingredients to Priest of Light?" He knew that someone had only received the formula just 1 to 2 weeks ago. "Yes, I've gotten it from Mr. World," Derek answered honestly, but he didn't go into the details of the transaction. At this moment, Leonard's mind was filled with the words, "Forsaken Land of the Gods," and "Giant King's Court." He had a feeling like he had walked out of a fantasy or myth.
He instinctively reassessed his knowledge of the Tarot Club, realizing the weight of the simple words of how the members come from different places.
Even the churches of the 7 deities are unable to find the forsaken land of the gods, but the Tarot Club can do so. It has even roped in a member from there. Right, Isaac Eggers, who I believe wields the death card, doesn't appear at the gathering. Apart from the members here, there are others that come directly under Mr. Fool? It's as I first imagined. It's a secret organization that might develop into an orthodox church. It's not much weaker than the Aurora Order or Rose School of Thought, and it might even be stronger in certain aspects. This is really a divine council. Amidst Leonard's thoughts, Alger agreed with Derek's guess. That's what it is. Exploring the Giant King's Court is a very dangerous matter. He wishes that you quickly grow stronger to resist that Elder Shepherd's level. Derek nodded in vague acknowledgement. I get it. Thank you, Mr. Hanged Man. He then shared information about what he saw at Noise City, leaving Leonard and Zio dumbfounded. They had no idea how such a strange state and atmosphere was generated. However, the Fool Klein noticed something familiar. He felt that Noise City and the Foggy Town resembled each other to a certain degree. The walking crowd was suspected to be lifeless marionettes. Could it be that there's a higher sequence item of the seer pathway or some monster there? Klein didn't say a word as he silently took note of Noise City. At this moment, Zio glanced at the world and said, showcasing some goodwill, MI9 has recently been investigating Gehrman Sparrow's origin.
Chapter 960. The Fool's Sigh. Upon hearing the name Gehrman Sparrow, all the members on both sides of the long bronze table looked at the world.
No one spoke or interjected. They more or less knew that the crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, had once again done something huge such as killing Admiral Hell Ludwell. However, Audrey didn't believe that this was the main reason why he would suffer mental problems. And the way they acted made Leonard instantly realize a fact. Everyone in the Tarot Club knew that the world was Gehrman Sparrow. Klein's disguise is really well done. However, why does he let the other members know of his identity as Gehrman Sparrow? Isn't it common sense to hide one's background at such gatherings? Amidst his puzzlement, Leonard heard the blurry figure the world reply with a hoarse voice. What clues has MI9 obtained? Zio showed no shame in betraying MI9 as she replied frankly. They have confirmed that the identity Gehrman Sparrow is fabricated, and that it was sourced from Backlund. Indeed, he was previously known as Sherlock Moriarty. He became Gehrman Sparrow after leaving Backlund. However, Sherlock Moriarty isn't his real identity either. Leonard subconsciously surveyed the area and realized that, although the other members weren't surprised, they didn't seem to show any signs of realizing it. Hence, he believed that their knowledge of Klein was only at the uppermost surface. Under Klein's control, the world Gehrman Sparrow chuckled and answered Miss Judgment's information. There's no need to bother about such matters. To him, to figure out who the fake identity of Gehrman Sparrow was given to, one had to first capture Queen Mystic Bernadette, or one had to obtain news of Sharon from her. Clearly, the level of difficulty made it nearly impossible. In comparison, if they did the same as Leonard, starting off from the events in which Detective Sherlock Moriarty was involved in, there was a chance of them figuring out more. However, since MI9 had chosen the wrong direction, Klein was happy to see them take the futile route. Mr. World is unperturbed and very confident. Zio retracted her gaze and didn't continue. At this moment, Audrey deliberated and asked, Mr. World, will you be returning to Backlund in the future? Will you still use the identity of Dwayne Dantes? As a qualified psychiatrist, she obviously wasn't going to inform the mental problems of the world to the other members of the Tarot Club. She only wanted to confirm if he would still return to the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation. That way, she could be in closer contact to him in the real world, allowing for a better checkup. She didn't conceal the matter about Dwayne Dantes, since the original members already knew of it. As for Mr. Star, he was clearly familiar with Mr. World. As for Zio, she had first to inform her ahead of time. Upon hearing Miss Justice's words, Leonard nearly couldn't believe his ears as he felt a little confused. Klein Moretti is equivalent to Dwayne Dantes? I've once asked Dwayne Dantes to his face about Klein Moretti. No, it's impossible. Dwayne Dantes is an undying creature who has lived since the fourth epoch. The way he acted is sufficient proof. Old Man said the same too. At that moment, Leonard was unable to control his tumultuous emotions. He instinctively rejected the fact that Miss Justice had conveyed. If what appeared here was his astral projection, he felt that his expressions would be rather obvious, oscillating between red and white. Opposite Leonard, Zio looked up as well, looking at Mr. World with puzzlement. He's Dwayne Dantes? Dwayne Dantes is Gairman Sparrow? I even accepted his butler's mission. I even protected him before. I even pitied him. He can squash me to death with one hand.
Zio then turned her head and glared at Furs.
I don't dare to say too much about Mr. World. I could only briefly mention a little. Furs turned her eyes away in guilt as she mumbled silently. Alger and Katlia figured out something from the duo's reactions. Miss Magician and Miss Judgment knew each other in the real world. Miss Judgment had once interacted with Dwayne Dantes before, but she didn't know that he was Gairman Sparrow. As a senior spectator, Audrey noticed the abnormalities of the Star and Judgment without a doubt. Immediately, she understood that she had made too many assumptions. Audrey, you need to reflect on this, she said to herself in embarrassment and attempted to make up for it before Mr. World spoke. Dwayne Dantes is a public identity.
At times, it will be Mr. World, and at other times, it will be the other blessed of Mr. Fool.
So that's how it is. Makes sense. Leonard's mind stirred as he instantly accepted Miss Justice's explanation and figured out many different matters. The Dwayne Dantes that appeared during the period before the breaching of St. Samuel Cathedral's Cheney's Gate was likely Klein.
The periods before and after that was the other blessed of Mr. Fool.
That Death Consul? Indeed, he's an undying creature who lived since the fourth epoch. Old Man's old friend. Yes, it might be other blessed I'm not aware of, but their levels definitely aren't too low. Other blessed. Does that mean Klein is also considered Mr. Fool's blessed? It's no wonder Mr. Fool said that he comes here and participates in the gathering, but the experiences are different from mine. It's because he's a blessed and enjoys the benediction of Mr. Fool, so he also has the ancient aura. It's why Old Man doesn't realize that Dwayne Dantes is played by different people? This explains my previous question. As a blessed, Gairman Sparrow doesn't need to keep his identity a secret. But to Judgment Zio, Dwayne Dantes being a public identity, or him being Gairman Sparrow was not her concern. The reason why she overreacted was because, after realizing the truth, she felt embarrassed at all her various thoughts back then. Seeing the atmosphere return to normal, Klein heaved a sigh of relief inwardly and controlled the world Gairman Sparrow to answer Miss Justice's question. Yes. When the time comes, there might be certain matters that need all of your help. When he finished the second half of his sentence, the world swept his gaze across Justice, the Magician, Judgment, the Star, and the Moon. He has plans for something in Backlund? Audrey instantly understood what Mr. World was getting at. She momentarily felt excited but also a little worried. She was excited because she was about to participate in a secret operation that all the participants didn't seem to have any ties with, to the point of not even knowing each other. This was something she had always looked forward to. Her worries stemmed from whether the operation would have any threat to Backlund's safety, or if it would bring harm to the innocent. As for danger to herself, she wasn't too worried. She believed that Mr. World would arrange for the mission to be held in the outskirts of the city, provide key information, or cause serious misdirection to the target, without needing any direct participation or fighting. Emlyn was the second person to read between the lines. And this was a result of his innate aversion towards troublesome matters. Will it be troublesome? He thought with a frown without saying a word. While the other members came to a realization, Alger took a deep look at the world Gairman Sparrow and said, I recently received news that the traitor of the Church of Evernight, Archbishop in Sangwil, was killed in West Balam. Before that, he had already become a demigod. As for the sealed artifact, 0-08, which he had stolen, it's unknown whose hands it's in. The only thing that can be certain is that the battlefield was cleared by the Church of Evernight. The hanged man is very updated on the news. It's only been a few days. The church should have kept this strictly confidential. However, there might have been other factions arriving at the square that day. Leonard was taken aback for a moment, but he didn't provide more information. This was the first time Audrey and company were learning about the news. They could only determine that the matter was rather important from the words Archbishop 0-08 and demigod. But since it had nothing to do with them and there wasn't any stimulus, they weren't too intrigued. As for Katlia, as she had a deep impression and understanding of Grade O sealed artifacts, she planned on seeking out information on this via Queen Mystic and the Moses Ascetic Order after she returned to the real world. Amidst a brief silence, the Fool Klein suddenly extended his hand and rapped the table's surface. He felt that he needed to warn all the members. In the coming years, the waves of the times would come flooding in. Upon hearing that, all the members straightened their backs or made them even straighter before turning to the seat of honor at the long bronze table. Even the newly joined Leonard and Zio were no exception. It was almost instinctive. Then, they heard the profound and lofty figure chuckle amidst the gray fog. The times have changed as a result. The times have changed because of this? In Zangwill's matter is key to something? Although it involves a Grade O sealed artifact. Alger, who had shared the news, never expected Mr. Fool to place so much emphasis on it. He was momentarily unsure what to make out of it. Leonard, who had participated in the matter regarding Zangwill, felt the same. He knew how important and terrifying the Grade O sealed artifact was, but he never expected that what happened that day would change the times. While Audrey and company wore blank looks, they focused fully. Even Derek couldn't help but take on an attentive posture. The Fool Klein surveyed the area and said with a laugh and sigh, "Adam is one step closer to being divine." Chapter 961 Warning by informing, Adam is one step closer to being divine. Such a simple sentence instantly sent tumultuous waves through every member of the Tarot Club. Other than Leonard, the other members, including Zio, who had been briefed of the important points by the magician, immediately recalled the information regarding Adam. Ancient sun god, City of Silver's creator's son, brother of blasphemer Ammon. Suspected to be one of the 8 kings of angels. And this mythical figure, who had existed before the cataclysm, had become active in the real world once again. And he was one step closer to being divine. This, to make Mr. Fool sigh, it means that Adam is probably just one step short of reaching the divine throne, sequence 0. There's a chance that he might make that step at any moment. Alger subconsciously came to a conclusion as he hurriedly clasped his hands and couldn't help but have thoughts run through his mind. A sequence O true God is about to be born. There are still births of true gods in the 5th epoch? This will be the first true god this epoch?
With deities no longer able to descend upon the real world, it's unbelievable that a sequence O would still appear.
Alger always found himself ambitious, with him now setting his sights on sequence 2, to become an angel. But after hearing about Adam, he still found it unacceptable.
One had to know that the last one to become a sequence O true god was the former god of craftsmanship, the present god of steam and machinery.
And that happened in the late 4th epoch. Since the 5th epoch, over 1300 years, there hadn't been any new existence reaching the divine throne. It's no wonder Mr. Fool said that the times will change as a result.
Amidst Katlia's scattered thoughts, she suddenly came to a realization as though she could see the waves that marked the end of an epoch flooding over.
Having already gathered the ingredients and being in the process of making preparations for the sequence 4 ritual, she believed she had the chance of attaining divinity in the near future to change her existence. She was still reeling in joy, anticipation, and unease. But at this moment, she suddenly felt a baffling sense of horror. All she wanted was to communicate with Queen Mystic face to face to confirm the future. Furs, Zio, and the other members had a myriad of reactions. On the one hand, they were shocked that Adam was attempting to achieve divinity, never expecting such a matter to happen in the 5th epoch. On the other hand, they were worried for their present life.
After all, be it Emlyn from the Sanguine, or Audrey who lived amongst the Lone Kingdom's upper class, all of them lived in the 5th epoch, living in a situation which had more than 1,000 years of history setting the foundation. They didn't dare have any sacrilegious thoughts towards true gods. Even when facing evil gods like the true creator, they still felt a deep sense of fear and awe, acknowledging their level and loftiness. Therefore, they couldn't believe that a god would soon appear. They couldn't imagine what would happen next. In their eyes, the Fool was a reawakened ancient god,
an existence who originally sat at the throne of Sequence O. One step closer to being divine. Becoming a god. Derek was mostly excited, as though he could see hope and have a target to strive for.
To him, only a Sequence O could save the City of Silver.
Adam? Becoming a god. Although Leonard didn't know who Adam was, just the simple words of being one step closer to being divine was easy to understand.
He connected it to that ordinary priest who had appeared after the battle ended and had picked up 0-08 in front of Klein.
That's Adam? Or a subordinate of Adam? No, 0-08 is a Grade O sealed artifact. Only Adam, who's very close to the divine throne, can do it personally with great certainty. It's no wonder the battle within Zangwill was easier than I expected. I thought the best outcome would be me and Klein dragging in Zangwill into hell together. Who's Adam? Why haven't I heard of him? Perhaps a result of being parasitized by an angel, allowing him to know some of the secrets and developments of the fourth epoch, Leonard had a deeper understanding of Adam's path to being divine. The impact he felt wasn't too great, with most of his feelings puzzlement and curiosity over Adam's true identity. And at this moment, the fool didn't speak again or give further explanations.
It was as though he was simply warning the members to make preparations for the change of the times.
Amidst the confusion and wandering thoughts, the world Gehrman Sparrow glanced at the star Leonard and simply said, "Adam is the son of the ancient sun god, blasphemer Amon's brother." Leonard immediately jumped in fright and failed to control his expression. He had a deep impression of Amon, and he had a deep trauma for Amon because of Old Man's descriptions. And Adam was Amon's brother, so it was very possible that the level of horror was likely the same between the two brothers. The world ignored the star's reaction and continued. It can be confirmed now that Adam is one of the 8 kings of angels, titled Angel of Imagination. He is ranked on par with Angel of Time Amon. The reason for him targeting in Zangwill is to obtain 0-08 to make up any shortfalls for his path to being divine. And his plan succeeded. Angel of Imagination. Adam is a king of angels from the spectator pathway? Audrey instantly connected this to the Dragon King Anquelt's title, Dragon of Imagination, and she had long known that mind dragons represented the spectator pathway. As for Leonard, another comprehension obstacle appeared before him. He had been stumped by the concept of a king of angels, but he was too embarrassed to ask.
He had planned on seeking Old Man's help when he awakened.
Alger pondered over Gehrman Sparrow's words as his expression turned slightly odd.
He probed. "You seem to have witnessed the matter?" Just as he said that, all of them heard a familiar hoarse laughter. After Gehrman Sparrow finished laughing, he looked at the star and said as though it was nothing, "The murder of Zangwill was committed by me and my partner."
Katlia's mind instantly went blank. She could accept that Gehrman Sparrow could easily finish off Admiral Hell, but she couldn't imagine that he would one day kill a real Sequence 4 demigod. Katlia quickly calmed down because, with a king of angels involved in the battle, it was possible that a Sequence 5 could kill off a heavily injured demigod due to various coincidences. Furthermore, he had a partner. Audrey read confidence from the world's tone. She couldn't help but ask out of curiosity, "Mr. World, have you already become a demigod?" The world didn't give a direct answer as he chuckled. "In the future, all of you can entrust matters involving demigods to me." Every member present figured out the meaning in between the lines. He had become a genuine Sequence 4 demigod. Furthermore, he was the kind who had the ability to kill peers at his level. At that instant, Katlia became abnormally calm. She tried hard to recall everything that she had seen and heard regarding Gehrman Sparrow.
She was very certain that he was only a Sequence 6 before the visit to the ruins of the battlefield of gods.
He relied on the glove to match a Sequence 5. As for Gehrman Sparrow's search for mermaids without hunting any of them, it implied that it was a requirement of a ritual. This meant that he had indeed advanced to Sequence 5 back then. His various performances after that proved this point. Today, it had only been about 3 months since Gehrman Sparrow stepped into the ruins of the battlefield of the gods, but he had already advanced to Sequence 4, becoming a demigod existence. This overturned Katlia's understanding of the world. She wasn't too old, with her age being less than 30. But to reach Sequence 5 and gain the title of Admiral of Stars, it took her about 7 to 8 years. It was only in the past 1 or 2 years did she have the confidence to attempt to breach the gate to become a demigod. With her starting to make preparations, she believed she was already far ahead of the pack. Mr. World is impressive. He became a demigod so quickly. Derek sincerely felt joy. His idolization for Mr. World grew more intense as he hoped that he could be like him, becoming a demigod at the fastest speed possible. Audrey was both alarmed and delighted. Following that, she gained an understanding towards the abnormality in Gehrman Sparrow's mental state. From the looks of it, his low spirits, gloomy, and depressed feelings happened after he became a demigod. These are the negative effects accumulated from potions. It's just like how I nearly lost control when I became a psychiatrist. Also, after becoming a sequence 4 and gaining godhood, he could naturally penetrate more of reality. He then realized that he had been sleeping for a very long time. His family had passed away, making him lose his goals. How pitiful! With his warm nature, he must have had deep feelings for his family and friends. However, I'm so envious. Does being Mr. Fool's blessed make one advance so quickly? I also wish to become a demigod early. Mr. Fool's mention that the times have changed as a result leaves me fretting. While Emlyn and the other members were still in shock, Alger, who also shared the same feelings and felt deep envy and jealousy towards Gehrman Sparrow, had other thoughts. As Mr. Fool's blessed, Gehrman Sparrow's embroilment with this king of angels and 0-08 matter clearly isn't an accident. On the contrary, it might be more reasonable that it's a mutual plan between Angel of Imagination Adam and Mr. Fool. That will explain it. Two mythical figures that existed before the cataclysm. One is awakening, and the other is making an advancement, the two secretly coming together. Amidst his thoughts, Alger had another idea. Since Adam had obtained 0-08 and opened the door to the divine throne, what about Mr. Fool? What benefit did he get in this matter? Subconsciously, Alger turned his body and slightly bowed his head to look at the seat of honor. He didn't dare look directly, and could only look through the corner of his eye. Chapter 962 being known almost instantly, Alger discovered that Mr. Fool was somewhat different than before. In the past, although Mr. Fool was distant and profound, making him appear unfathomable, as though he was looking down upon everything from above, that was all. It wasn't like he was now. Even though he wasn't doing anything, he seemed to have fused with the entire space, a clear expression of him being the ruler at the pinnacle level. Sweeping his gaze, Alger saw the third card of blasphemy as he felt more certain of his guess. Indeed, Mr. Fool and the Angel of Imagination Adam had cooperated to machinate in Sangwill's demise. One of them obtained 0-08, making him take one step closer to being a god, while the other obtained the various benefits in a card of blasphemy and regained a substantial amount of his strength. The times will change as a result. At that instant, Alger had a deeper understanding of what Mr. Fool had just said. The other members undoubtedly noticed him turning his head, and they realized that he was looking at Mr. Fool. After a brief moment of surprise, they made a certain realization at different speeds. Mr. Fool was aware of Angel of Imagination Adam's plot against Nsangwil from the very beginning and had sent his blessed to cooperate. He had even provided a certain level of help. If that weren't the case, how could a recently advanced demigod participate in a matter that involved a king of angels and Grade O sealed artifact? If this weren't the case, the world wouldn't have been able to understand the situation that well, even if he had been embroiled due to all kinds of coincidences. The obtaining of the card of blasphemy, Mr. World's advancement, Nsangwil's death, the meeting of Angel of Imagination Adam's goal, these all happened in 1 week. This means that the relationship between them is tightly intertwined. My previous intuition was right. The obtaining of a new card of blasphemy and the appearance of an abnormality in Mr. World's mental state were the different outcomes of the same matter. Audrey nodded very slightly as she confirmed her theory. Leonard was increasingly convinced that Nsangwil's matter was more complicated than he had imagined. Apart from King of Angels Adam, there were likely other important figures of similar levels appearing back then. Otherwise, Amon's brother, the son of the ancient sun god, had no need to seek out Mr. Fool's help. After all, no matter how powerful or terrifying 0-08 was, it was incapable of comparing with the blasphemer as described by Old Man, as Adam and Amon were likely on par with each other. The evil spirit that Klein pulled into the underworld probably isn't simple. It's definitely not something that being from the hunter pathway would be enough to describe it with. Klein's participation in the matter regarding Nsangwil isn't solely for revenge, but is also due to Mr. Fool's orders. As Leonard sighed, he didn't generate any negative feelings. Instead, he was secretly relieved. From his point of view, this was a very ordinary situation. Mr. Fool's agreement in convening such a gathering to establish a corresponding organization while hosting it as a deity was definitely not because he solely wished to make the area more lively or being done out of goodwill. He definitely had his goals and needs that he wished blessed like Klein or members like him could complete. Therefore, seeking revenge on Insangwil and accepting Mr. Fool's mission wasn't in conflict. The latter didn't reduce the former's meaning and importance. As for why he was relieved, it was because Leonard believed that Mr. Fool's clear expression of his goals had made it better than having everything chaotic and unknown. He didn't need to guess or wait with trepidation. He originally had intense wariness for Palez Zoroast precisely because he wasn't sure of his true motives. At this moment, the Fool Klein didn't say a word. He didn't confirm or deny the members' guesses and theories. Controlling the world, he made him continue. Adam might have established a very secretive organization, and it has been secretly steering the development of the times. Many important figures you might never have expected are members of this organization. They would machinate one matter after another. Also, after leaving this place, do not say or write down Adam's name, including his title. Try not to think about such matters, because he has the trait of any mention of it will be known. The more you know about him, the more he might know about you. This is somewhat similar to 0-08. After hearing Mr. World's description, Audrey instantly recalled learning of the mysterious organization from Mr. Fool, the Twilight Hermit Order. This made her quickly come up with a corresponding theory. The King of Angels Adam was the leader of the Twilight Hermit Order. The Angel of Imagination was a member of the Spectator Pathway. Likewise for 0-08. Therefore, any mention of it will be known was a beyond a power of this pathway at higher sequences. Likewise for the more you know of it, the more it knows of you. Impressive. But won't this be rather noisy? Audrey momentarily looked forward to it with envy while also feeling worried and puzzled. Any mention of it will be known. So the organization behind the assassination of Duke Negan, the one backer behind Kalangos, was established by King of Angels Adam. Alger was first somewhat enlightened before his expression fell. He began to suspect that the primitive island that he had previously explored was related to this secret organization. This was because Kalangos had once ventured deep into it and discovered several items. Furthermore, the final disappearance of the island had resembled the powers of the Dragon of Imagination as described by the Sun. Putting the two together, Alger couldn't help but come up with such a theory as he made a deeper realization that Mr. Fool's cooperation with the Angel of Imagination had started when he and Gairman Sparrow stepped into that primitive island. He was more convinced that it was the truth because after the existence in that island's ruin awakened, the only thing that happened was a sigh. He and Gairman Sparrow weren't stopped from leaving. So that's how it is. The way important figures set up their ploys are truly well concealed. I didn't notice it at all back then. The games between gods are truly complicated. Perhaps only Sequence 1 Beyonders or even King of Angels are qualified to participate. Alger sighed as he felt a baffling sense of desire. Furs had already forgotten the mysterious organization which Mr. Fool had mentioned previously. Only when she heard any mention of it will be known did she recall that it was related to Duke Negan's assassination. However, she wasn't concerned about this problem but something else. Back when she was informing Zio about the general situation of the Tarot Club and the general knowledge, she had mentioned Adam's name. Adam has the trait of any mention will be known? This, Zio and I are known by him? Furs instantly felt horrified as she couldn't help but turn her head and cast her gaze to Zio. She had learned that Adam was the son of the creator from Mam Hermit. Furthermore, she had never emphasized to not mention the King of Angels' name in the outside world. I've mentioned Adam in the real world, Furs said with a clear stammer. Zio's nerves were taut as though a venomous snake had crawled into her clothes and was sliding across her back. Katlia tersely acknowledged. No need to worry. Although not many people know of Adam and Amon, there's no lack of them. I've mentioned his name on several occasions. As long as the words you mention doesn't involve any secrets, I believe he will only observe you for a moment before casting his gaze elsewhere. She was rather certain when saying that because, in the Moses ascetic order that had been pursued by knowledge, Adam's existence wasn't a secret. People often mentioned him. At this moment, her mind was filled with another matter. Could it be that the secret, ancient organization that Emperor Roselle joined was the one that King of Angels Adam established? Furs hurriedly tried recalling and said somewhat hesitantly, there were mentions involving the Forsaken Land of the Gods, the Giant King's Court, Amon, King of Angels and other knowledge. Would that be a problem? She was very happy that she had never mentioned the words Tarot Club or described the other members. At most, she mentioned that the gloomiest was Gairman Sparrow. Katlia thought and said, "At your sequence, discussing knowledge at that level is indeed strange. However, if Adam were to delve deeper, he will realize that you're related to the Abraham family. It's quite normal to be aware of this information. What you need to pay attention to is that any major matters involving the Abraham family will require you to be wary of Adam." "How do I be wary of him?" Furs forced a helpless smile as she glanced at the seat of honor at the long bronze table. Then she looked back at the hermit and said, "Thank you for your analysis." As Mr. Fool hadn't said anything, she decided to believe Ma'am Hermit's words. At this moment, Klein sighed inwardly. Back when Katlia mentioned Adam during the tarot gathering, he wasn't aware that Adam's name wasn't to be verbalized, nor did he know that he was related to the Twilight Hermit Order. It was only when he entered Grozel's travels and learned from ascetic Snowman about Adam being the angel of imagination that he grasped this point and came up with the theory. After seeing Mr. Door's warning from Emperor Rozel's diary and gained preliminary confirmation, he ultimately lacked the opportunity to warn the various members. Furthermore, the way the Archbishop of the Church of Steam casually mentioned Adam's name made him believe that many people in the real world knew of Adam and that it wasn't taboo. Furthermore, Adam might not be his full name. He wasn't in a rush to guide the conversation towards this, but he was waiting for an opportunity. Any mention of it will be known? The organization established by Adam is really impressive. Is this the target our tarot club is aiming at? As Emlyn reflected over it poignantly, he gained a clear picture of the tarot club. He had previously been figuring out a category for the tarot club. He realized that it wasn't like an Orthodox church, and it was unlike the other secret organizations. Apart from being a Messiah alliance, there wasn't anything too special. It muddled his analysis. And today, he finally confirmed that the early development of the Tarot Club could match Adam's organization. Knowing 0-08's trait, Leonard wasn't surprised that Adam had a similar trait. He was more concerned about the organization with many important figures participating, as well as the Abraham family which Ma'am Hermit had mentioned. He had once heard Palaz Zoroast mention, this family's standing in the fourth epoch was very high. Chapter 963 Problem with Intelligence. According to what Leonard knew, amongst the major noble families of the Fourth Epoch's Tudor Empire, the Abraham family was ranked first. It was even stronger than the Amon family who had the blasphemer. Of course, he couldn't be certain if the Amon family didn't have any members, that it was all filled with the Son of God's avatars. Miss Magician is actually an important member of the Abraham family. Everyone here isn't to be trifled with. Is this what's called a gathering of protagonists? Leonard first sighed before he made a self-deprecating comment. Derek didn't say a word, nor did he make any connections. He seriously listened to Mr. World's description, as well as the conversation between the two ladies, the magician and the hermit, before keeping them to heart. To him, the other members were in the outside world. Regardless of what happened, it had little to do with him or the City of Silva. Only matters regarding the King of Angels was something to be concerned about. After all, be it the Angel of Fate Ouroboros, the Dark Angel Sasrar, and Red Angel Medici, they had left traces around the City of Silver. As for the Angel of Time, Amon, he had personally visited it before, bringing about inexplicable horror. After everyone quietened down, Derek couldn't help but consider certain matters. Any mention of it will be known. How should I inform the chief about such matters? Or is it fine not saying it for the time being? I'll just mention that Amon is a son of the Creator, that he has another brother who's of the same pathway as the Dragon of Imagination. If the City of Silver were to encounter an overwhelming disaster, would Adam be able to hear it if I said his name? Can he enter the forsaken land of the gods? With this in mind, Derek instantly felt somewhat ashamed. This was because, in such situations, the honorific name he should chant was Mr. Fool's. At this moment, the world spoke again. Although War Angel Medici has long perished, he isn't completely dead. The soul he'd left behind has fused with the souls of the ancestors of the two major families of Sauron and Einhorn, forming an evil spirit. During the death of Inzangwil, there were traces of its appearance. Klein had specially brought up this point to firstly pass this information to the Church of Evernight via Leonard. Secondly, it was to remind the Hanged Man to take note. After all, he had been to Bansi twice, possibly embroiling himself with the Red Angel evil spirit's fate. That evil spirit was War Angel Medici? While Leonard was feeling alarmed, he was taken aback. He had just guessed that Adam wasn't the only bigwig who had been present. Later, setting off from the titles of War Angel and Angel of Imagination, he suspected that the evil spirit was a king of angels in its former life.
And such an evil spirit had been sent to the underworld without putting up any resistance under the influence of the luck siphon charm.
Old man's level is higher than I previously imagined.
Yes, the evil spirit must have been weakened by Adam, and perhaps even by Mr. Fool, before Ma'am Daly and I arrived.
Otherwise, it's not an enemy we could have handled. Right, what was Adam doing back then? There wasn't any sign of him during the entire battle. Could it be that there was another figure at the level of a king of angels holding back Adam?
Leonard felt tumultuous waves swishing through his heart as he forgot to observe the reactions of the other members.
War Angel Medici. He perished and became an evil spirit. Bansi was the place his descendants lived. He was one of the founders of Rose Redemption. Alger quickly linked up the pieces of information and learned many new things. That mural I saw in the Bansi Harbor Telegraph Office must have been drawn by that evil spirit. The World Gairman Sparrow had gotten me to head to Bansi Harbor to search for traces in order to grasp that terrifying evil spirit's location. It was to prevent his subsequent plans from being disrupted. Thankfully, I didn't destroy that mural. Otherwise, I might have caught the notice of the evil spirit. While Alger sighed in relief, he felt increasingly alert.
He planned on getting the Blue Avenger to leave Bansi Harbor and head for the northern front of the Sonia Sea to investigate the matter Mr. Fool had previously given him.
Audrey, Katlia, and the other members listened attentively as they kept it in mind without making too many connections. This was because the matter the world was describing contained information that mostly consisted of key and rich points, and lacking the additional experiences and knowledge, they were unable to expand on the matter. After sharing the information that everyone needed to take note of, the world chuckled hoarsely. That's about it. After a brief silence, Emlyn straightened his back and looked ahead. An important figure from my kind will arrive in Backlund, and a meeting with me has been arranged.
After a pause and seeing how no one responded, he cleared his throat and asked, "How should I deal with him?"
Him. Another angel. Leonard felt numb as he noticed something. Mr. Moon had mentioned the concept of his kind, and he had red eyes. Leonard was taken aback as he thought to himself, he's a sanguine? Sanguine. Don't tell me he's Emlyn White from the Harvest Church? He had been close to Klein's identity as a detective. Leonard couldn't help but look at the Moon's side profile and figure a few more times. The more Leonard looked at him, the more familiar he appeared. He was almost certain. Without any doubts, Emlyn noticed the star sizing him up, just as Audrey was surprised and excited to confirm that Mr. Star had suddenly realized he knew Mr. Moon. Did I say something wrong? That fellow, the Star, looked somewhat astonished. He knows me in the real world? Do I know him? A series of thoughts flashed through Emlyn's mind as he subconsciously sniffed, trying to catch the scent of the new member beside him. However, the gray fog ensured that he failed. As he surveyed the area and waited for the Hanged Man, the Hermit, and the world to provide him with an analysis and suggestion, he tried hard to recall if he had met someone like the Star. Gradually, he felt a sense of familiarity, but he couldn't recall who it was due to the superficial impression the person left on him. At this point, Audrey recalled another problem. Mr. World and Mr. Star know each other, and Mr. Star knows Mr. Moon. Then, does Mr. World know Mr. Moon? She subconsciously sized up the person at the lower end of the long bronze table, but she failed to read anything of use from the World Gairman Sparrow. As for Alger, he turned to look at the Moon after a few seconds of thought. He said with some deliberation, Mr. Fool just mentioned that the times are changing. Although the important members of the Sanguine might not know of the ins and outs, at their level, they will more or less sense something and make preparations. The reason that this important figure wishes to meet you is both a probing action and surveillance. You just need to act as you usually do, but there will subsequently be some tests and missions. As I imagined, a second test and mission will begin. I wonder what revelation the ancestor has given. Emlyn nodded and said to the Hanged Man, "Thank you."
With the question answered, Furs, who had been holding back all this while, finally spoke. "Mr. Moon, the intelligence you gave me regarding the abandoned ancient castle was highly problematic.
There were 2 ancient wraiths, but in the underground area was a door. Sealed behind the door is a powerful corruptive power. As long as one enters the region where the ancient wraiths are, they will be corrupted." This. Emlyn frowned slightly. He wasn't enraged, and he instead felt that her description was completely right. If the person who had provided the intelligence knew that there were two ancient wraiths, he wouldn't have ignored that door. As a cultured and noble sanguine, Emlyn never wished for anyone to incur any losses or harm because of his mistakes or neglect.
He was rather perturbed by this as he thought and solemnly said, "I will investigate the source and provide you with an answer."
As Furs had returned safely, she didn't mind it too much. She tersely answered, indicating that she was awaiting the outcome. As for being saved by Mr. Fool, with it happening once a month or even twice a month, she had already lost count. She was prepared to do anything Mr. Fool instructed her to do in the future. After they finished their conversation, Audrey was somewhat concerned. She asked out of curiosity, "Do you know what brought about that corruptive force?" Furs shook her head.
"I don't know." With Mr. Fool not sharing any information, and how she didn't have any Roselle diary entries to exchange for the answer to the card of blasphemy, Audrey retracted her gaze and attentively listened to the conversation of the other members.
After a while, the learning segment came to an end as the Tarot Club drew to a close. The members stood up and bowed at the existence at the end of the long bronze table to bid him farewell. This time, Leonard didn't appear too slow. The dark red light dissipated as he returned to the real world.
In front of him was a red glove he hadn't worn. At this moment, a slightly aged voice suddenly sounded in his mind. "Whose dream did you enter a moment ago?"
"Old man has woken up."
Leonard was first delighted before he heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't immediately answer Pallas Zoroast as he deliberated over an answer.
"Say, it is possible that, at certain times, Dwayne Dantes is Isaac Eggers who's disguised using some particular item?" After learning that Dwayne Dantes was a shared identity, he began doubting Old Man's original theory. This was because this parasite had came to a conclusion based on the different appearances and auras of Isaac Eggers and Dwayne Dantes. Furthermore, not every one of Mr. Fool's blessed looked identical to Dwayne Dantes, nor were every one of them beyonders of the seer pathway. Therefore, since a shared identity was needed, it meant that they wielded a mystical item or sealed artifact that allowed them to transform into someone else. Together with the ancient aura of being a blessed causing some interference, it wasn't impossible for an angel to make an error in judgment.
Pallas Zoroast fell silent for 2 seconds before saying, "You reminded me.
Isaac Eggers does have a mask that allows him to transform into anyone." Chapter 964 Medici's cause of death as expected. After confirming his hypothesis, Leonard didn't harp on the matter as he returned to the topic at hand. "Old man, didn't you ask whose dream I entered?" "Yes, on the day we sought revenge against Insanguil, Amon's brother and a king of angels appeared."
In his mind, the slightly aged voice didn't immediately reply.
After a few seconds, there was a sigh. "It's just as I expected. Matters related to 0-08 will often attract Adam. Thankfully, I chose to sleep ahead of time."
Leonard didn't have the time to ponder over Pallas Zoroast's words as he instinctively cried out, "Old man, why you said his name."
Adam's gaze was about to be cast over, or might have already landed on them. The slightly aged voice chuckled. "You actually know about Adam's trait. However, me mentioning him doesn't matter. He will only imagine that someone else is talking about him. Of course, there's no need for you to know too much. That will definitely make you occasionally think of it. Once that happens too frequently or at a close physical distance, Adam will also know of it, just like 0-08. Furthermore, 0-08's influence is limited to a huge city, while Adam's is the entire world. As horrifying as Amon. Another form of horror."
Leonard composed himself and forced himself to stop thinking about Adam as he ruminated over what Pallas Zoroast had said. Suddenly, he nearly blurted out without suppressing his voice, "Old man, did you sleep not because you were weak, but because you were afraid of encountering Amon's brother?"
Ahem. Pallas cleared his throat. "It was a result of both reasons, but they don't contradict one another. After giving you the 2 worms of time, my condition deteriorated again. Under such circumstances, how am I to deal with a king of angels and conceal my existence? I'm already old and feeble. There's no need for such developments, so it's almost necessary for me to hide."
Leonard was momentarily at a loss for words and said after a few seconds, "Amon and his brother should be older than you."
The ancient sun god is an ancient god before the cataclysm. Without waiting for Pallas Zoroast's reply, he heaved a sigh of relief.
"That is to say that, because of your act of sealing yourself and sleeping, That king of angels didn't discover a problem with me?
Pales chuckled.
No, it was discovered. Leonard's expression sank as he nearly looked around frantically. He suspected that Adam was sitting in some corner, silently listening to his conversation with Old Man. At this moment, Pales Zoroast added, "You were very close to him.
Do you think you can hide from a king of angels who has accommodated the spectator pathway's uniqueness? Besides, you likely cried out Old Man impolitely at the most critical moment."
Leonard was taken aback as he subconsciously answered, "Why, you heard it." He suspected that Old Man had heard him but had deliberately chosen to ignore him for fear of being discovered by Adam.
"No,"
Pala's slightly aged voice teased. "I don't have to hear it to know what you would do."
"How can I not be aware of what kind of person you are?" Amidst Leonard's embarrassment, Pales Zoroast continued, "Adam definitely knows that you've been parasitized, but as I'd sealed myself and was asleep, he didn't discover who was parasitizing you. The demigods with such abilities aren't many, but it's also not a very tiny number." "Is that so?"
Leonard instantly heaved a sigh of relief.
He was most worried about having Adam see Old Man before returning to inform Blasphemer Amon. With this in mind, Leonard raised a question he had been wondering all this while. "Old Man, what's a king of angels?" Pales Zoroast didn't ask where Leonard had learned of this concept as he simply explained, "Those that exceed sequence 1 but have yet to become a deity. If we are specifically talking about the 8 kings of angels, apart from those that meet the previous definition, they're the ones who served the ancient sun god before the cataclysm." "What does it mean to exceed sequence 1 but have yet to become a deity? How is that achieved? By accommodating the so-called uniqueness?" Leonard had the intention of asking, but he suspected that Old Man wouldn't answer in detail. He gradually decided to first talk about other matters before finding an opportunity to raise this issue again. He deliberated for a moment and said with a suppressed voice, "During the battle for revenge within Zangwill, I faced immense adversity, to the point of not being able to look at my enemy head-on, much less use the Lux Siphon charm. When seeking your help failed, I chose to chant Mr. Fool's honorific name and had received a response. After everything ended, I found myself heading for an ancient palace as though I was dreaming. It was above the boundless grey fog." Before Leonard finished his description, Pales, who had been listening quietly, cut him off. "You met the Fool?"
"Yes, his aura is vastly deeper than the sea, loftier than the mountains. His figure was cloaked in the grey fog, preventing anyone from seeing it clearly." Leonard recalled his encounter and described in a poetic manner. "He established an organization, holding a divine council a true one every Monday afternoon. I'm already one of the members." Pales fell silent once again and didn't say a word for quite some time. Only after a while did he say, "The Fool allowed you to tell me this?"
"Yes."
Sitting there, Leonard nodded and let out a suppressed voice into the air as he said, "Old Man, do you know him?" Pales Zoroast sighed and said, "No, but I can roughly guess of his origins."
"You don't have to ask what it is because I won't tell you. Haha, this might be an opportunity for you. Otherwise, it will be difficult for you to become a demigod."
Leonard turned agape before closing his mouth.
He stopped mentioning the tarot gathering because Mr. Fool hadn't given him permission to go into the details of other matters. He thought and said, "Old Man, is there another king of angels named Medici, known as the War Angel?" Pales tersely acknowledged. "You can also address him as Red Angel. However, he has long perished. You were even close to where he died." "Where?" Leonard was surprised, but he had no impression of that happening. Pales scoffed. "Are the memories of you people from the Evernight pathway so terrible? I recall that your goddess wasn't like that. Do you still remember the ruin found beneath Backlund? The Tudor Trunsoist United Empire? The place where Alista Tudor became Blood Emperor?" Leonard asked in enlightenment.
Pales Zoroast's slightly aged voice resounded once again. "That's right."
As Leonard tried to figure out the logic embedded in this matter, he informed Old Man of the evil spirit. The remnant soul of Medici fused with the 2 angels of the Sauron and Einhorn family, becoming a brand new evil spirit? Pales repeated Leonard's words in disbelief. Following that, he couldn't hide his amusement and said, "The 3 of them are absolute archenemies, the kind that can't stand each other's existence. To think that they are together in death, fused as one, is truly, haha, it must be quite lively."
Leonard didn't know what Old Man was laughing about as he subconsciously asked, "They are archenemies?"
Pales held back his laughter as he said, "Yes, The reason why Medici failed and was captured was because he was dealing with the Sauron ancestor who had fallen into his trap. It wasn't that he wasn't prepared, but that was mainly focused on the primordial demonist side. Surprisingly, Alista Tudor suddenly went mad. On this matter, Amon and Adam had played a rather important role. That evil spirit is an enemy of Adam. Why would the Blood Emperor want to capture Medici and the two angels of Sauron and Einhorn? The place they perished was in the palace where Alista Tudor was trying to become Blood Emperor. They were the ritual materials needed to become a true god? According to Mr. Fool, Adam is one step closer to divinity after obtaining 0-08. Is this also considered a gathering of materials? Amon is dealing with Old Man because of similar reasons? Leonard had some theories and had the urge to ask, but he ultimately held back. He was afraid that he touched on highly secretive matters, causing Old Man to react negatively. He planned on finding an opportunity at the Tarot Club to ask about such matters.
After a brief silence, Leonard looked at the closed door and said with a suppressed voice, "Has Mr. Fool and the church reached a certain degree of tacit cooperation?"
"That's the implication if no one is investigating you," Palaz Zoroast answered in a rather direct manner. Leonard nodded indiscernibly. "What will they arrange me to do next?" "Arrangement? Reward you for the services rendered and allow you to advance to Sequence 5 after you finish digesting the potion. Then, you will be allocated a Red Gloves team, and you'll be sent to complete missions. Otherwise, they might send you to a large diocese like Backlund to be a deacon in charge of certain matters," Palaz said without much concern. "Back to Backlund. Klein seems to be planning something in Backlund." Leonard's thoughts were suddenly liberated. He didn't converse with Old Man again as he slumped against the wall and cradled his head with his hands, sitting rather leisurely. Late at night, in the border town of East and West Balam, outside a row of warehouses. Dressed in a formal suit, Dwayne Dantes, with his white sideburns, was holding a gold-inlaid cane. After exchanging signals and countersigns with the officer on duty, he watched as the officer opened the door to the warehouse and heard him say in a relaxed manner, "It's everything inside. Check the goods and move it yourself. Also, pay me the remaining amount before leaving." Dwayne Dantes nodded slightly and weighed the suitcase in hand. In it was £5,000 in cash entirely from May Sanchez's down payment. At this moment, two figures were silently watching this develop 2 warehouses away in a 3-story building. Chapter 965 Brief crisis. On the top floor of a small building, a black-haired, brown-eyed man donning dark-colored clothes was looking down at the arms deal not far away. This man, who looked about 28, couldn't help but say, "He actually got May Sanchez? Oh, holy Lord of Storms, Alfred. If I had known it would turn out this way, we might as well have done the mission ourselves. Even if all the expenses are deducted, we should still earn at least £20,000.
The man beside him was a young man in a black trench coat. He looked about 24 and had a head of resplendent blonde hair and blue eyes that resembled a lake.
He had pretty good looks.
Being addressed as Alfred, he shook his head and said, "No, that would be too noticeable."
May Sanchez's allegiance has always been unclear. Before figuring out his take on matters, rashly discussing an arms deal with him is extremely dangerous. Dwayne Dantes is able to earn £20,000 because he dares to take the risk. The black-haired and brown-eyed man immediately scoffed. To think that Alfred Hall, who has led a few dozen men to assault a battalion with over 1,000 troops, would claim that he doesn't dare take risks. Alfred shot a glance at him and said, "Pagani, this isn't the same thing. That happened because I was confident of wiping out their command center. And once there's a lack of leadership, 1,000 scattered troops might not be as formidable as 1,000 pigs. In addition, the transaction this time is solely a test. It's to establish communications and to set up a channel. If it's done by us, who are we to seek out the next time? And the subsequent ones? If we keep at it, we will ultimately expose ourselves. Once that happens, it will be a diplomatic matter."
Furthermore, with the deals deepening and broadening, who knows if this would incur the notice of the demigods of other factions?
"That would spell danger." "Haha," Pagani said with a smile. "How can demigods be that free to pay notice to such small-scale arm deals? Every faction has a limited number of demigods. There are too many matters awaiting them."
"I know. I'm only raising an example," Alfred replied in a staid manner.
Pagani didn't harp on the matter and turned his gaze back to Dwayne Dantes, who stood outside the warehouse.
"This gentleman is said to be very generous.
He donated stocks worth more than £10,000 to the Church of Evernight shortly after he arrived in Backland. Is this the early-stage investments that you often speak of? Also, he seems to be working at the same charity foundation with your sister. TSK. Such men are very welcome with the young ladies.
He's good-looking and has an outstanding demeanor.
He's smart, experienced, and has the artifice. He has seen all kinds of women, and he's at the age to settle down. Alfred, you have to warn Audrey that a playboy will always be one, and that one's moral character is a flaw that can never be corrected. You can't let the most dazzling jewel of Backland be taken by this fellow.
Alfred turned his head to glare at Pagani.
There's no need for you to show any concern about such matters. Audrey isn't a young and clueless lady.
Her knowledge of the world is far more mature than you imagine.
Besides, my father and mother are in Backland. They have the ability to prevent any nasty things from happening. Upon saying that, Alfred looked at the nearby arms warehouse and paused. May Sanchez actually sent Haggis. I'll go greet him. This isn't the best time to meet, right? Just as Pagani was about to say a word, Alfred had already turned to walk down the stairs. Klein, in the form of Dwayne Dantes, didn't bring any servants. He held his gold-inlaid cane and stood with May Sanchez's representative, Haggis, outside the warehouse. They watched as crates of munitions were carried out and loaded onto carriages. At this moment, he half turned his body upon sensing something and looked elsewhere. The person that was reflected in his eyes was a young man wearing a trench coat without a hat. His blonde hair was combed into a slick back, and his blue eyes looked like a lake under a bright clear sky. He was tall with a good build. His every move exuded an indescribable sense of dignity. Even without any troops surrounding him, the authority he wielded was obvious. Alfred!
Haggis noticed the man as well when he cried out in delighted surprise.
Alfred, Miss Justice's second elder brother. This feeling resembles that of the arbiter pathway. Klein raised his right hand and took off his top hat to press it against his chest as a form of greeting. After Alfred Hall greeted Haggis, he turned to look at Dwayne Dantes. Your character is widely spread across Backland. Even I've heard of you, despite being in East Balam. Character? A character at making arms deals? Klein lampooned as he chuckled. I'm only doing things that I believe need to be done. Alfred nodded. I believe there's no need for any self-introductions? Haggis should have mentioned me to you.
Yes, Colonel Hall, Klein replied with a smile. I only learned that Miss Audrey has another brother here in the southern continent after I arrived. That he served in the military and has rendered impressive services.
Alfred cast his gaze on Dwayne Dantes' face and changed the topic. I thought you would take the opportunity to work at the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation, but you surprised me by choosing to come to the southern continent. Klein maintained his smile from before. For an outsider to truly enter a pre-existing circle is quite impossible just by giving donations, doing charity, and hosting balls and banquets.
Alfred tersely answered, very wise.
After exchanging a few pleasantries, he asked Haggis, did something happen in Kukua? It seemed rather serious. Haggis squeezed a smile. I'm not too sure. I was hiding in an underground bunker at the general's residence. I later heard that there was a lightning storm at Revival Square. Lightning storm? Alfred's gaze turned towards Dwayne Dantes again.
Klein nodded and said, indeed.
The hotel I was staying at isn't too far from Revival Square. I did see continuous bolts of lightning striking that area. All of that happened in the day. Alfred's gaze turned towards Haggis again. What happened to the scene in the end? Most of the area was in shambles. There were marks of lightning strikes. Haggis didn't hide the truth at all.
Alfred nodded gently and pointed to the side before saying to Haggis and Dwayne Dantes, I still have other matters to tend to.
We can chat again when the opportunity arises. See you again, Klein politely replied. It made them appear to be at a social gathering instead of being outside a munitions warehouse. He was watching Alfred Hall leave when his body trembled. His head made an abrupt turn to the side. In the primitive forests that covered East and West Balam, a figure was slowly outlined with his back bent. He had a fleshy face with slightly brown skin. His clothes were baggy, and he had a rapier by his waist. In his hand was a silver mask. Looking to his sides, this figure straightened his body.
He was none other than Admiral Hell Ludwell, who had previously entered the underworld.
However, at this moment, 2 clumps of blood-red flames were burning in his eye sockets. He looked completely different from before.
I'm starving. Ludwell opened his mouth, letting out a sigh that seemed to come from his chest. He then cast his gaze in a different direction, muttering, "The owner of this marionette is over there.
Fate has brought us together again. He has a hunter pathway item on him. It's perfect for replenishing myself."
Just as he said that, a bloody mouth appeared on the left cheek of Ludwell's face. It opened and closed as it said, "Medici, what we need to deal with first is our survival. After this marionette loses its connection to its owner, it's no different from the dead. The remnant spirit will quickly return to the underworld and not be able to maintain the body. And without the underworld inside him, we will inevitably be weakened until we dissipate. Yes, the most pressing matter now is to find another gatekeeper."
Another mouth appeared on Ludwell's right cheek.
Red Angel Medici immediately scoffed. "Sauron Einhorn, were the two of you women in the past? Your nature as angels has been left in the dumps because of you. That fellow was able to resist 0-08's arrangements several times, implying that he's definitely not simple.
With a chance to lock onto him, how can we give it up?
Once this marionette completely dies, things wouldn't be that simple again. Besides, the hunter pathway item on him can effectively extend our existence.
Once we finish him, it wouldn't be too late finding a gatekeeper."
The bloody crack on Ludwell's left cheek immediately scoffed.
"Medici, have you sacrificed your brain to the true creator?"
That fellow has clearly advanced. In our current condition, defeating a Bizarro sorcerer isn't difficult, but killing him is nearly impossible.
Medici wasn't frustrated, and instead, he laughed deeply.
"This isn't something unresolvable. As long as you allow me to chant my lord's honorific name, helpers will immediately arrive. A gatekeeper might even be automatically brought here."
The mouth on Ludwell's right cheek immediately opened and closed.
"Sauron, let's work together to stop him and search for a gatekeeper."
"All right." The mouth on Ludwell's left cheek didn't hesitate to reply. Upon seeing this, Red Angel Medici laughed.
"The two of you have fallen for it. My goal has been met. I can confirm that the two of you were previously women." The two mouths on Ludwell's cheeks roared, "Shut up.
Humph, we've been merged together for 2,000 years.
Would we not know what tricks you're up to? There's no need to struggle again." As they spoke, the colors around Admiral Hell Ludwell instantly saturated and stacked upon one another. He had entered the spirit world and began traversing it. Outside the munitions warehouse, Klein finally retracted his gaze as his premonition for danger vanished. For that one moment, he had a baffling feeling, but he was unable to project the corresponding scene in his mind.
"What happened?" Klein muttered to himself.
Without waiting any further, he threw the suitcase in his hand to the officer who was in charge of handing and taking over. Then he said to Haggis, "The rest is yours.
You can give me the rest of the payment." He was referring to the heavy case filled with gold bars and coins.
Haggis had planned on having drinks with Dwayne Dantes after the completion of the deal to celebrate its success, and to discuss any future deals.
He never expected Dwayne Dantes to be in such a hurry to leave.
"All right. It's on the carriage," he pointed and said. Alfred, who had already walked quite a distance, turned his head to look over, perplexed. He wasn't sure why Dwayne Dantes wasn't following the pre-designated procedure. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.